We're going to call the meeting to order, and Alderman Ross is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by Alderman Heisman leading us in prayer.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dear Lord, we come to you today. We praise you for all the blessings that you bestow upon each one of us here, those that aren't present, the city of Shadow Park, our great state of Texas, and this great country. Lord, we again praise you for all the things you do for us, Lord, but we also know that there is so much strife and angst going on, and not just this country, but the world abroad. Lord, we ask that you please be with the families that have gone through so many tragedies this week, Lord. It seems like we pray every day or every week to relieve us of these tragedies, but we know it's in your hands. We know that you have full control, and we know that you will bring peace to these families in Europe, Lord. We just ask that you be with these officers' families that tragedy this past weekend in Kissimmee, Florida, Lord. We don't know why these things occurred, Lord, but we know that you ultimately are in control. And we just ask that you give us peace and give us comfort in these trying times, Lord, that you allow us to look around each one, not just next to us, but across the highway from us, in our classrooms, in our workplaces, Lord, and just allow us to treat others with kindness, Lord, to just be respectful of others. And we're grateful for that. And it's in your name we pray.
Amen. Okay. Item 3, citizens be heard. Dagny, if you would go to the lectern and project, I'd appreciate it. Yes, and give your address as well. Thank you.
I'd like to speak very briefly on 2 items. The first I've spoken about before at the city council meeting, and that has to do with the 4 acoustics in this room, which were exhibited just a minute ago. I was unable to hear Alderman Heisman's prayer, and I'm sorry I missed it. This is not a request just for the hearing impaired. I think everyone knows whether you're hearing impaired or you have very good hearing, this building has been lacking in good acoustics since it was constructed. And at the very least, I would ask that lapel microphones be provided. That's a fairly inexpensive thing that could be done. The technology is out there. I'm not asking for an expensive fix, but I am asking again, and I've done this many times, for a fix. And I really hope that that will be tended to this time. It's not just a request, this is a requirement under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The second item I'd like to talk about has to do with, well, it's related to the fact that my husband and I just got back from hiking about 30 miles in the Lincoln National Forest in the Southern Rockies. Now, as we came back into town, between the traffic and the higher density of people, the clear cutting that's been happening on Lock Hill, Selma, in Tree City, USA, I have to admit it was just frustrating as all get out. Now I'm hearing that there may be movement afoot to do something on the municipal track. I thought that that was a settled issue back a few years ago. Apparently it's being resurrected again. Back a few years ago, when this issue was first being raised of putting possibly something on the municipal track, someone sent me an email that I thought was very well written at the time, and I still think it is. And basically, embedded in that full page were these words about the muni track. Let us leave it as nature graced it. Leave it for those that cannot complain. Vote or choose where and how they must live. It's a small enough gift for all they give us. The they meaning the animals, the wild animals. Let's vote for the grandest park of all, right here in Shadow Park. Tell them
Thank you. Brings us to item 4. Without objection, we will dispense with council comments, which brings us to 5.1, presentation discussion, Ordinance O-2017-001, proposed amendments to Chapter 6 and 36 of the city's Code of Ordinances regarding accessory buildings, outbuildings, and portable buildings, and the authorization of special exceptions. Bill, do you want to get this started?
I'll be brief, and then I'll turn it over to council. Just to remind everybody, at the July 24, 2017 council meetings, council voted to table consideration for the item and move the discussion to a workshop. So essentially, in your packet, the discussion material remains the same. Staff did, however, complete a comparison chart in an effort to illustrate the differences between the approved P&Z version of the ordinance, the motion by Alderman Simpson, and the motion by Alderman Colomer. And I will tell you that both Alderman Colomer and Simpson made some changes to their motions, and they can explain that from when it was presented in July 24th. Let's see if there's anything else that I want to add. I'll just refer to you. You got a hard copy of the comparison chart here. Just to describe that, in reality, there's the sections that have been recommended by amendment by the P&Z are listed on the left white column, and then a summary of what the P&Z version, the June approved version of the P&Z is summarized in the green. And then what we did was Alderman Simpson's amendments. We summarized with highlighted yellow the changes, proposed changes. This is not meant to be a substitute, the actual motion. This is just meant to be a tool to make sure we have, you can clearly see the differences and go from there. And then Alderman Colomer is in the far right column, and you can see. So for example, on the size of portable buildings in 695, and into the current P&Z version of 695, the size is 144 square feet, and the P&Z retained that size constraint as an authorized limit. Alderman Simpson has recommended increasing the size to in all districts minus A3 to 200 square feet. And you can see that Alderman Colomer also has recommended a change from the P&Z version to 200 square feet. And I don't know that you want me to go through all that, but you can see the crosswalk on each particular item. And I can, and the first one's easy because there's agreement also by both Alderman Simpson and Colomer to remove the special exceptions clause that was proposed by P&Z. So in 695, there's really only one difference in that. So if you want me to pause, I can do that. If, Mike, you want me to summarize that, I can do that either way, but you guys wrote the amendments, and I think that you can see that.
Okay. There are several ways to go through this. One way is to go on a line-by-line basis with the comparisons and to see where we have disagreements and only talk about the items that need to be resolved by us. If there's a clear consensus on each one of the items, then there's no reason for y'all to make presentations to discuss the items that are in agreement with council and to only discuss the items that there are questions from council or that there's disagreement among council. Is that a reasonable working plan for you guys? Okay, so the first item that we come up with is whether this applies to all the districts or to only to A3, and then to have a separate set of rules for the other districts. So, Mike, you're proposing that we have it in all districts, or Mike Colomer, Mr. Colomer, in all districts, and Simpson, that we have separate rules for A3 compared to the other districts. The difference goes to the differences between A3 and the others. Mike, would you feel comfortable just talking about the differences between those and and not, so that we go through and say, well, do we agree on 6 of these items, and then we're only going to talk about the 2 that don't overlap into the other districts?
Okay, Mr. Mayor, thank you. The reason that I have focused in on A3 is because we received a petition from 100 of the voters in A3 asking this to happen. And so rather than supposing that what A3 wants fits for all the other districts, then that's the water that I'm carrying, is for the voters in A3 who voiced their opinion. So I don't know what the voters in the other districts want. I just know what I've been told by the petition in A3. So that's why I'm focused on that. I have no objection to expanding land use permissions to the other districts.
Okay. The first is the size differentiation. The Planning and Zoning Commission, and we have Buddy Alleman, who is the subcommittee chair for this particular item, who is here, and we'll recognize him for participation in the meeting. Bill, do you want to let Buddy sit next to you so that he can be closer to the mics as a potential presenter? The first difference is Planning and Zoning recommended basically a 12 by 12 building, and the others are at 250 for all districts, 250 for districts other than A3, and 350 for A3. 200 for all districts, 200 for all districts but A3, and then
350.
it's 350
For
from
A3.
Mr. Simpson. So is there anybody that would like to see the 144 that is from Planning and Zoning's recommendation? Okay. Now we're to the 350 as it relates solely to A3, because the other ones are 200, and I think that everybody's saying that 200 is okay. Do we have any comments about 350 and A3?
I think it's too large.
Okay,
If I may, Mr. Mayor.
yes.
The 350 is a total. If you have more than one accessory or portable building, the 200 will cap the size of any one building, but no more than 350 total square feet is the intent of my amendment.
Okay, Michelle?
But in the all districts minus A3, it says increases to 200 square feet. So then only for A3, it says increases to 350 in size, 1 or more. It doesn't have a 200 per.
Yeah, but
There's no
that's gonna go to the actual language. No more than 350 square feet in one or more portable buildings, and that probably would need to be clarified a little bit, Mike. I understand that, but now I understand what he's saying, that if you've got 2 buildings, collectively, they can be 350, but each one may not exceed 200 square feet. Is that, I don't want to, Mike, is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. That's the intent.
Yes.
If we can ask everybody to speak up, we're not hearing what's in back here.
Okay, Mike, you're not catching it, but I think that,
Michelle, we can't hear.
Got to put it right up next to
We actually turned up the volume, but we didn't get the feedback, so we're trying to.
yeah, as we cross over on the mics. Okay. I can hear mine projecting. Okay, so the question is the differentiation between, Mike is suggesting a 200 square foot building, and he's suggesting that in the aggregate that the buildings not exceed 350 square feet. Thank you for the clarification. Are y'all happy with that? As opposed to, you could have, in the A1 district, you could have, right now, you could have 2 buildings that would be 250 square foot buildings. And so you could have 400, Mike's, 200 square foot buildings, sorry. You could have 200 square foot buildings in A1. And Mike is saying that the limitation would be 200 in the aggregate.
No. with
350 in the aggregate, yes.
aggregate
350 in the aggregate.
with- And and it's no more than 200 in any one building. That's, because that's not what it says here. It's just not clear.
Okay.
It says it here sort of, but not here.
Okay. What do y'all think about that clarification?
Well, the clarification's fine, I just don't agree with it.
Okay, so, Mike, in A1, you can have multiple buildings, and you can have two. You can have two, and each one of them is subject to the size limitation, which would be 400 square feet in the aggregate. And Mike is saying he would like for A3 to have up to two buildings, apparently, and that would be, that the aggregate limitation in A3 would be 200 square feet. Now, you got to remember that in addition to this, we have our 1/3 limitation on the square footage of all lots, that no lot can be covered by more than 1/3 impervious cover, I believe is what we have in the tables. Bill, is that correct?
That's, there is a size for lot area, and I'll have to look real quick to tell you which one that is, but there is a size which has been, that's not been a contentious, and that's really for accessory buildings, not necessarily portable buildings.
Okay. Okay, so, Mike, do you want to talk as to why you would want them to have a different limitation, or are you suggesting that it only be one building that be permitted in A3? Yes, in A3.
My basic premise is that planning and zoning has had this for, what, a year and a half, almost 2 years. They have had a number of working groups, focus groups. They've had public hearings, a number of public hearings, I believe. I attended a couple of them, and they basically made almost no changes. They've dealt with it for a long time, and I think I trust their decision, and they had the petition involved. I looked at the petition. I met with Mr. Sanderson with his petition. It basically represents about 50 or 60 residences out of about, I don't know what there is in A3, there's about 280, I think. So while it is something that needs to be considered, I don't think it's a mandate. I know planning and zoning took that into consideration, and I believe that's why the special provisions through Board of Adjustments came about. At least that was my interpretation from my meeting with Chairman Jansen. So I basically just did a little bit to match the square footage between the two codes, 6-95 and 3636H, which is the zoning reference. They had two different, in the original ordinance, they had two different square footage, 144 and 200. I thought 200 was reasonable. Excuse me, I don't think there's any reasonable person who will say that a 350 square foot building is portable. I just don't think you could do it.
And Mike's not saying that a 350 square foot building is portable. He's saying that a 200 square foot building is portable, which is what you're saying, and he's requesting a second building be permissible in A3. Mike, don't let me speak out of turn for you, but I think that's what you're telling me, that you want
Well,
A3.
I understand
He wants
that.
two buildings in A3 is what he's asking for.
Well, I understand that now since he's clarified it, but when I was looking at his ordinance and what is written here on this spreadsheet, it really doesn't say that. It
No,
looks
it
like
doesn't.
he's still going for one at 350, so I appreciate him clarifying that. But that's really my reasoning, is that a lot of good people looked at this for a long time and did not find that, overwhelming reason to make radical changes. And I really don't think we want to get involved with having a change that only applies to one district like
Okay,
this.
so what we're really coming down to is, do we want, the first issue I think that we need to resolve is, do we want to allow more than one portable building? And these are not accessory buildings. Accessory buildings are permanent buildings, and that's a different issue. These are portable buildings that are not permanently attached to the ground. Do we want to allow more than one portable building in the A3 district? Mike, I know that you do. I'll let you go ahead and speak to that.
Well, I would just like to respond that I too have attended the public hearings. I've both in P&Z and here, I've discussed this with Chairman Jansen. And I can tell you, at the public hearings, at the most, 1 or 2 people spoke up against this, and we've heard from 100 people that they want that. That's real clear. This is representative government. the folks told us what they wanted in their district, and I think we owe it to them to give it to them.
Yep.
Okay, Michelle?
But the key to that is you said in their district, which I agree with, and I don't have a problem with it being in A3. I don't think it should apply to A1.
Okay. Bob, do you have any thoughts? Mary Ann?
I think it only does apply to A3, his proposal.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I agree with that.
Bob?
Yeah, I initially, had the same thoughts about the 350, because that's all I clearly was not in favor of a building that size. 200 to me is the right number. And, I'll reiterate. 200 to me is the right number. I have a lot of respect for all the work that's gone in with P&Z and Chairman Jansen and Vice Chairman Buddy, and I think that a lot of time and effort's gone into this, and a lot of these, ordinances and the setbacks and the things that we're talking about today have been in place for many, many years, and there was a reason, a rationale for that. And although I'm willing to compromise on a few things here, and we can clarify some of that later, I think we have to stay true to what made Chavanel Park, and what I think people envision the city to be, and certainly people that I've talked to. So I believe 200 is the number on the square footage.
Okay. Buddy, I'm going to ask that you might weigh in as far as, I don't know if planning and zoning considered a number other than one portable building in the A3 district. Have you all had discussions on that? I know what your recommendations are.
We've had several discussions on it, and we did consider just A3, and I think that on that term, I can speak for the complete commission that it's all or none. I mean, that's been the unanimous decision when that came up, because as it was when we were first given this endeavor of doing the corrections and cleaning it up, the 144 and the 200 square feet was the main focus, and then it was just one or the other, and that's an easy choice. But as we continued on and we saw some of the other discrepancies in the ordinances, this is when it started really getting out of hand, and this is what's made it a 2-year project. Is the additions and deletions and cleaning it up, and as the city's grown, and then we have the bigger lots versus the smaller lots. We have lots that weren't in, that were not in compliance with city ordinance because they were smaller than the half acre, and we cleaned that up. And so this has just been accumulation of different things, and it's just gotten ugly. I mean, honestly, we've listened to a lot of citizens.
Yeah. And Buddy has now just said something that I don't know that we'd focused on previously, and that is the irregular size of the lots that are in A3, that we have zoned that to be 7/10 of an acre. However, there are a lot of lots that are not 7/10 of an acre, and those lots that are less than 7/10 of an acre, it may be difficult to put 2 portable buildings on those lots, and I'm just projecting what y'all's rationale might be. That it might be very difficult to put 2 on those lots. And one of the problems that we face is that we can't create irregular rules within zoning districts. The idea is you have uniform rules within zoning districts. You can't create a hodgepodge where you have one set of rules on this street and another set of rules on another street. Now, that does not preclude planning and zoning in the city from creating new districts within the city that are set on some uniform standard that's probably doesn't look like a gerrymander, but that has some concise meaning as far as the community is concerned. And that's, our zoning districts are uniform, and they're compact. They're not elongated. They don't have tails, and they don't, do funny things. They don't look like barbells. And so what I'm hearing Buddy bring to us is, golly, some of these lights would fit very easily with 2, and some of them, it's going to be hard to get 2 on there, and that doesn't mean that those homeowners aren't going to want to exercise the same rights as every other citizen in that neighborhood. Is that correct, Buddy?
That's correct, insane.
Mary Ann, you were going to say something.
I
I'm
didn't,
sorry.
I know it's taken a long time, and I know it's been a lot of work, and I don't want to stir up a hornet's nest, but you talked about it getting ugly, and I was just wanting some clarification.
Well, what I mean ugly is that, you know, we've had a lot of dialogue from a lot of different citizen groups, and it's not personal. And as at P&Z, we're not trying to make it personal. We're just trying to come up with a good decision, a compromise amongst the citizens in the entire city and not just in one district. And that's why we brought up the Board of Exceptions, you know, the Board of Adjustments on a special exception, because we did look at some of the lots and the irregularities of the lots, especially in A3, because some are very narrow, some have some very strange triangles on the corners. And when you start bringing setbacks into it, which it's been a council three times since I've been there. I've been on the board 6 years. And the first time it got sent back to us, and the setback issue has become an issue because we get a lot of comments that, why are you changing it? We weren't trying to change anything. We were just trying to clarify. And it's the along the way, and I say, and I don't use the term ugly as a true definition of ugly. I'm just saying it's just been a pain on listening to the different aspects of how we can fix it when that's not what City Council directed us to do.
And I totally get that. I think, though, when we're talking about people's property, it is a little bit personal in the sense that, you know, people are not necessarily wanting to go out and get into fistfights, but it is a personal issue of this is my home, this is my homestead, my property, and what I want to do about it. And if people are committed enough to come up and talk to us about it, pro or con, sign a petition, pro or con, that evidences a level of commitment and a level of what it is that they want. And I know you tried to listen to it, and I can appreciate that.
Well, we did listen to it, Mary Ann, and we listened from the homeowner whose property it is, and from the neighbor who has to look at it. So that was a two-way street, I mean, basically. And we saw it we took in consideration the neighbors. And then we took in consideration the people who build it without even asking. And all of a sudden it's up. And they're looking, and they're complaining, and they're saying, how did this get in my backyard? And then all of a sudden it's been there for 10 years, and somebody hears that we're looking at an ordinance, and they're saying, well, it's been there for 10 years, now why are you complaining? And, you know, and we were dealing with that too. And then how do we fix the past? Well, we can't fix the past. We just got to prepare for the future. And that's been our perspective in putting this together. As Chavano Park continues to grow, and we continue to build out, and home values continue to grow, and taxes continue to stabilize, you know, we look at the population. I mean, we've taken consideration all different types of aspects on how do we make this right, not only for the citizens, but for the city. And then for the future, when people want to put their property up for sale. How do we fix it? How do we write it correctly to where it's a good deal? I mean, we're all about compromise. The whole board's about compromise. We want to get this off our plate, but at the same time, we want to do it right.
Okay, so we're talking about A3. I think that the consensus is 200 square feet is the correct is the number that we're going with. Over planning and zoning's 144. The question that we have is, do we want to go with 2 buildings in A2, or do we go with 1 building in A3? I'm sorry, 2 buildings in A3 or 1 building in A3. That is the issue. Okay, Mike says only 1 in A3. Michelle?
1.
1 in A3. Mary Ann?
I think the amount that folks want.
Okay. Mike?
No more than 2.
No more than 2? Bob? Okay. So the consensus, it's not a unanimous, but the consensus toward working toward an ordinance is to continue the the one building limitation in A3. Okay, Planning and Zoning has recommended 2 buildings in A2. I thought we already had provided for 2 buildings in A2.
I did too.
But this is a clarification. It's probably the difference between Chapter 36 and Chapter 6. It's a clarification as opposed to a change.
Yeah, there's no disagreement on that from
Okay.
all parts.
Okay, are we fine with that? The next change is the 12-foot height limitation. And the question is, in A3, there is to allow for an increase to 12 feet inside the setbacks, and that's the first item that we would discuss, is to allow for a 12-foot building inside the setbacks. Mike, do you want to speak first to that?
Well, there's limitation of no closer than 5 feet from the rear and side property lines, and 12 feet from the grade, or from the base of the building, allows for a full height at the corners, or at the side walls, and still get a good enough gable to provide the runoff and shedding of leaves and such like that. So that was the basis of the 12 feet.
Okay. And Planning and Zoning and Mike have suggested 8 feet from the base of the foundation instead of grade. Is that correct?
Yes, I changed it to from the top of base foundation, and that's really for a simplicity of measurement. If you have the grade, if the grade is virtually, if we're talking about a concrete slab, for instance, and it's 2 or 3 inches on one end, and on the back side it's a foot, which grade is it going to be measured from? Or are you going to have a sloping roof? I mean, or is somebody going to try and kick dirt up to it to make it fit the bill, It just seems like it'd be a lot simpler for code enforcement to come out and just put a tape on the top of the foundation and measure from there. It's not something that, I could go either way. It just seemed like it was simpler to me.
Let's just clarify that issue on grade first. Mike, are you okay with the grade issue? Okay, Bob, Mary Ann, Michelle?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to make measurements simpler.
And this is a great catch, because a lot of these buildings are 8 feet, and if you put them on a brick, then they're 8'3" now. But, or they're some, and we've had this problem actually before, so it makes sense to measure, because you have prefab buildings, so staff is definitely for this one.
Okay. Then the next thing is to come back to whether within the setbacks, with the setback limitations that Mike has outlined of the 5-foot and 12-foot, are we looking for a 12-foot building, or are we looking for an 8-foot building?
8 foot, because that's the highest fence we're allowed to have.
Okay?
That is true. The 8 foot is the fence, right, Michelle?
Yes.
So if it's going to be allowed in the setback within 5 feet of the fence or on the fence, then it ought to be able to be covered by the fence, in my
Okay.
opinion.
Mary Ann?
Well, just to be clear, we're saying that's in the setback because you can have a 12-foot height on the rest of your property, just not in
Correct.
the setback, right?
Correct.
So we're just talking about inches here, because in the middle of the yard or the property, you still will see that over the fence.
But there's a difference if you're seeing something that's 25 feet away from the fence than something that's right up against the fence. And if it's 12 feet right up against the fence or it's 12 feet, 25 feet from the fence, it's a different perspective. And you can also be screening it and growing things in front of it if it's not right up against the fence.
Well, you can, but even if you put it, if the setback is 5 feet and you put it, the 12-foot building right at that line, it's gonna be, you're gonna see it. So I'm just not, I know what residents told us that they wanted, and I'm not sure that the distinction is that big, but I might be in the minority.
Okay. Mike?
Well, once again, I would want to be able to build a building that I could move around in, rather than a building for short people. Nothing against short people necessarily, but, having the ability to use that 8-foot wall, seems like a very valuable ability to me, and, the question of engaging zoning requirements is that there needs to be some health or safety aspect to it, and I don't see what that health or safety aspect is. So 12 feet makes sense so that we can have a gabled roof down to 8 feet that's a usable wall size.
Michelle?
Shabano Creek, what are your rules?
The issue
Mike.
that came up.
Mike.
The issue that came up at a Board of Adjustments hearing was that a 12-foot building in the setback was allowing debris and runoff to go into the neighbor's yard. And that's what was part of our consideration when we did that when it was close to the fence.
Okay.
But I don't know what the Shabano Creek is, because, I know we can't have them in the setbacks.
At all, I
At
don't
all,
think.
period.
Yeah,
Yeah.
period.
Okay. Bob?
Well, my perspective is, I'm looking at it, really trying to be, someone that looks at it from both sides. When I look at it from a neighbor standpoint, all the way up against an 8-foot fence, 4 feet sticking over, no matter what that building looks like, I think could really be an issue to someone that buys that property, someone that owns it currently and it's built on that property. I think Buddy brought up selling a property with something like that on it might be an issue down the road. I feel strongly that, if you have the ability to put it, within the setback, outside the setback, then, I'm fine with 12 feet, but I think putting it right up against a fence and having a 4-foot overdraft from the fence, I just have a tough time. And I've had a lot of feedback from a number of people in the city saying they just don't want to look at things like that. And so that's my thought is I'm fine with, on the rest of the property, I just don't feel like we should be able to put it up against the setback, someone's property line.
Okay. Now, Buddy has raised an important issue, and that is the health, safety, and welfare aspect of this, and the runoff and the debris that could come from this, which raises an issue, should we even allow for the 8-foot buildings in the setback? Buddy, did y'all think about the 8-foot buildings in the setback, and should they continue to be permitted, or did we make a mistake by allowing the 8-foot buildings into the setback?
We did, but we wanted to, we did take that into consideration, but we wanted to limit how far. We didn't want them up against the fence, and that was a consensus. We understand because of the contour of the property. And in some instances, you're going to have to be pretty close to the fence, but up against the fence was an issue for us.
Mr.
Okay,
Mayor, I
Mike.
might point out that nowhere in our discussions have we talked about up against the fence. So that's sort of a moot issue.
Okay. Mike? We're getting late.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
As far as the no closer than 5 feet from the property line, I'm going to be honest with you. Originally, I basically supported not only the 12-foot and the 5-foot property line ideas, but as I started talking to people, a lot of people, a number of them at the 4th of July deal, and just neighbors, when you really start talking to them about what this means about putting a building that would stick 8 feet, not 8 feet, but 4 to 6 feet, depending on the size of their fence, above their property line of view, they weren't crazy about it. I didn't find anybody who was for it, other than, Mr. Sanderson. And I did support it at first. In fact, I told Walt when I first met him, I met him twice and talked about it twice. I told him if he had caught me months ago when he was doing this petition, when I was plain old resident Mike Colmere, oh, for the record, it's Colmere. Everybody stumbles over it. It's that E doesn't work. It's just Colmere, not Colmere. You can say how you want, but that's the record. Anyway, when I was just, plain old me, I'd have signed his petition. I told him flat out I would. In the second meeting, I told him that Alderman Colmere feller, he's got a different set of standards he's got to think about. And I got to think about the guy on the other side of the fence that doesn't want to look at that building. And there's a number of them. So as far as the closer than 5 feet, I had that in my original proposal. I had a meeting with the city manager, with Bill, and basically, we have a lot of buildings on the property line right now. There's a lot of small buildings. They're under the size limit, but they're on the property lines right now, or right on the fence. And it's my understanding that if we change it to 5 feet from the property line and make that our ordinance, everybody whose building is on the property line or on the fence now becomes non-conforming, and they can't rebuild them or do anything to them. Can you imagine how upset that's going to make some people? So I removed it. If we stay at 8 feet, 8 feet fence solves the problem. Basically, I'm agreeing with everything in planning and zoning's version, with the exception of the size, measurement from foundation or grade, and we're not there yet. I'll just say it, but I think that we need to keep portable buildings just black letter. Just take all the ignorant out of it as much as we can.
Okay. Okay, does anybody have anything else to say before we see where our consensus lies on the height of buildings inside the setbacks? Okay, Bob? Okay, Mike? Mary Ann?
People that we've publicly heard from have asked for the 12, and that's what I'm going with too.
Michelle?
I've talked to a number of people, and I believe 8, no higher than the fence.
Mike? Okay. Okay, outside the setbacks, and remember that we're talking about portable buildings. These are buildings that are not permanently affixed to a foundation or to the ground. Are we fine with the 12 feet? Anybody have any thoughts or comments? As far as outside the setbacks and beyond, outside the setbacks, we have a limitation of 12 feet. These are portable buildings. They are not permanently affixed to anything, which affects the height limitation. Does anybody want to consider a higher height limitation on a building that is not permanently affixed to a concrete slab or to a pier and beam?
No.
Okay. Base added allowable solid foundations. That's something new in the area. Everybody okay with that? And P&Z had recommended special exceptions to go to the Board of Adjustments. Let's talk about that now. Does anybody want to champion the idea of having a Board of Adjustments considerations of portable buildings? Okay, so no special exceptions. Okay, before I leave the first page, is there anything left that y'all would like to talk about on the first page? Mike?
I'm not sure if we have decided whether or not we're going to allow people to put portable buildings within setbacks. If we are, then what I added was written notice to the property owners on the other side of the property line, so that they know that it's there. So we won't have the event of it just showed up and no one told me about it.
I love the idea of the notice. The only question that I have is the enforceability of that, because we don't, that we allow the building there. And we didn't bring an attorney that's a municipal attorney to be able to guide us. Bill, do you have any insight on what our municipal attorneys would tell us? Because, yeah, the idea of you can't put it in unless you've given notice, but if you could put it up after the notice, regardless of what your neighbor said, did you really have to have a notice? Although I like the idea of the notice, because that would say you're putting in a concrete slab, in most cases, you have to pull a building permit, so the notice would go to the building permit. That would be a way that we could get to the notice requirement, Mike. Yes?
But I thought flat work didn't require a permit,
It requires permit.
always.
Concrete work does, not
Concrete.
rock.
Yeah.
Concrete work requires
Does.
a permit in all cases.
That was one of those,
Because we've had this discussion.
yeah, that was one of those, wives' tale, or it
Yeah.
was, folklore, it was, and there was, and we looked it up, and our ordinances required it.
Okay.
And the International Building Code requires it.
Oh,
So, what I would say is that the attorney would say this is a policy decision, not a legal decision. And I would just caution the council, I understand Alderman Simpson's intent, because if there's a 12-foot building, then that's an exception to what you've normally done, and providing notice seems to make complete sense in the setback. But if it's, routinely, people are putting 8 feet and 6 feet in there now, and this just seems to me that may not be a requirement if you're going to maintain it at 8 feet, because it's commonly accepted practices to put a portable building now, and now to add on an administrative requirement for 30 days notice, that's going to be, practically, that's going to be tough, because people will get a permit, and then,
No, they want to pour the next day.
and then they want it, well, it may not be poured, but they want to, in some cases, it's Home Depot's delivering it, in 3 days. And, Home Depot, some cases, I think Home Depot requires to see the building permit before they'll actually deliver it. So there's some considerations in terms of, I would agree if you have a 12-foot, because it's intrusive in the setback,
Yeah.
8 foot's less than it's common practice, and it may not be needed, but it's up to you. I would say it's a council decision in terms of whether you want to do that.
Well, as far as notice, we could require that any time you pour concrete, you have to provide notice to your neighbor of some time, so that, you're pulling a permit, tell your neighbor that you're pouring concrete. Now, is that a reasonable rationale for requiring somebody to do something that they can do in all cases, whether they give notice or not? And Mike, I don't disagree with you that it's a good idea, but I'm just looking for a reasonable basis for us to be able to have a governmental action that says you shall provide notice to your neighbor.
The neighbor has the expectation that nothing will be built in the setback. If you're building something in the setback, this gives your neighbor the notice that it's gonna happen.
Michelle?
Well,
Um,
go ahead.
The big thing that I'm trying to do is just talk to your neighbor.
And I don't have a problem with that, which is something that staff can be doing, not on an individual permit basis, but we could be putting in the newsletter, we could be sending a letter out to everybody saying these rules have just changed, do a postcard, and this is what's gonna happen. So your neighbors are gonna be able to now, we've changed the rules, build up to an 8-foot building on your property line. I mean, we just can send that
On
out.
concrete, yeah, on concrete, that's the change.
Yes.
Bob, do you have any thoughts?
Well, the one thing to think about, as you're saying that, is you build it on a concrete pad, that 8-foot building, and you got an 8-foot fence, it's gonna be over that 8-foot fence anyways.
But not,
Not by much, but yeah, a little bit. But I like Mike's idea. I just think if we approve this and the ordinances are what they are going forward, I just think, I think it's be very difficult to entertain that. But I think it's worthy of pursuing if we can, because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, but before we go forward, is it something that y'all would like for Bill to check with our attorney on? Because if it's something that we could do, I've heard a couple of people say, yeah, that's something that's reasonable to tell your neighbor about, but I think it comes down to, what does our municipal attorney say? Mary Ann, I'm sorry.
I personally have great neighbors, and so I can't see any problem with it. The problem I have a question about is what happens to the neighbor who doesn't want the other neighbor to do anything and opposes it? then what are we left with? Just, maybe they don't even care one way or the other, but they're like, no, I'm not for it.
But
We just give the notice, they're just required to give the notice, and then the neighbor has a say or doesn't have a say?
no.
So
they don't
what
have
is
a
the
say.
point
They
of the
wouldn't, they would
notice?
not have a
They
say.
don't have a
What
say,
is the
they're just
point
being
of the
advised.
notice?
They're being
Yeah.
advised. They're
I
being,
don't understand the point of that.
And that goes to the, yeah.
no.
If it's not going to change the end result, then why give notice?
Yeah, and that goes to what the attorneys, I think, are going to tell us is if you've got a right without a remedy, then did you really have anything at all? Mike?
I kind of agree with Mary Ann. I think it just adds another layer of something that they have to do. I mean, they got to get a permit, and then they got to send a letter out to their neighbors and or whatever and contact them. There is nothing in the current ordinances that prevents anybody from doing exactly what we're saying here, except, well, actually nothing, really. I mean, they can put one in the setback right now, as long as it's not over 8 feet. And there's no requirement for them to notify their neighbors of anything now. I don't see a reason. It's a good idea. It's like Mary Ann said, you have good neighbors. Just tell them, hey, I'm going to put a portable building up here, just let you know that they're going to be in here doing it next week.
We all hope that we're living in Lake Wobegon and we all have great neighbors. I know that I do. But I also recognize Mary Ann's comments, and they're absolutely pure. So do we want to go back and ask Bill to check with our attorney on the notice and make our final decision with that information, or do we just go forward from here?
Go forward.
Okay. Okay, do we have anything else on the first page before we leave this behind? Okay, Bill, do you have any questions concerning the items on the first page?
No, Mayor.
Okay, we have a number of items in chapter 36. Does anybody want to go through the items that planning and zoning addressed? Or are we all fine with those items and we'll come down to item 3636A2? Does anybody want to discuss any of the items in chapter 36 before item 3636A2? Okay. Okay, we're at 3636A2B, accessory buildings, exterior walls, masonry. Okay, Mike, Simpson, I'll let you go first.
Listening to the comments at the public hearings, there were a lot of people that came in and gave examples of absolutely gorgeous accessory buildings that didn't have any masonry. I default to my assumption that people that live in Chavno Park are grown up and they're going to put in really good stuff. And I can see that a glass and steel pool building would just as much enhance the beauty of the lot and the neighborhood as a 60% limestone and steel building. So I don't think we need it.
Okay. Mike Colmeyer.
I about 90% agree with that statement. This is one that I really thought about a lot. There are a lot of glass and steel structures that are really nice, but that one person who does it really sad is what we have to be careful of. There again, planning and zoning has looked at this for a long time. We've had these masonry requirements in our codes for a long time.
No, actually, let me correct you. We don't have it in our codes right now for accessory buildings.
Oh, you're right.
No, it
You're
does
right,
not.
you're right. I just think we have to be careful about that instead of just opening the floodgates. There was one thing that I didn't particularly care for. My house is like 40 or 50 years old now, and I can't even find the brick to match it. So the sentence where masonry used on the accessory building shall closely resemble the masonry used on the main building, I think that's problematic, because you may not be able to find, some of these houses are old native rock that you can't even get anymore. And to try and closely resemble that with something that really doesn't actually match it, it just kind of draws your eye to like, that's different, and it doesn't look right. So I think we could get away with that, but I'm going to default to planning and zoning on this one.
Okay. Michelle, I really appreciate you telling us something from a real estate perspective. We have very expensive real estate in Chavano Park, and as the mayor, I want to thank everybody who has very expensive real estate in Chavano Park, because it makes Bill's job a whole lot easier than having properties that don't have a lot of value. So please keep up the good work. But Michelle, I'd like to hear your thoughts, and if you could say something about the exterior appearance. And just as a reminder to the people that are listening at home, an accessory building is a permanent building that is affixed to a foundation, whether that is pier and beam or whether that is a concrete slab. It is a permanently affixed building, and that's the difference between a portable building and an accessory building. Michelle?
Well, I've said this over and over again. I don't believe that we need to have a masonry requirement at all on the accessory buildings, because as citizens have pointed out and has been discussed, there are so many new alternatives for building, and opportunities and things are going into a minimalist, more contemporary look, and so masonry is not something that's often required. And like Mike said, we have, a house that was built in '63. I may not find all the stuff. I'm having special wood made that matches my original siding, and it costs a fortune. And I don't think that we want to say, oh, you have to do that on an accessory building. I think that the people in our city are going to build things that will improve the value of their homes, and therefore I don't think we need to regulate what they do.
Okay. Do we have any other comments? Bob?
Well, this is something, one of the compromises that I felt was important to bring up, and I heard some really good in many of the council meetings. Some of the folks are sitting here in this audience, really convinced me that there are some really neat materials and things that are used today that I think we just have been stuck in our in what materials have been used for the last 30 or 40 years. I use an example of some of the wood floors that you see today, and some of the laminates that look as good or better than some of the wood floors. And I think we've done a great job in the industry in coming up with some really unique materials and contemporary looks. And so I really think that I'm in agreement that I think we need to allow people to put in what they believe is professionally coincides with what their tastes are, and I think I give a lot of credence and belief that people will make the right decision. But I think we need to, that's one area that I think we need to allow people to be a little more creative, and I think I'm willing to go with that one.
Okay. Mary Ann, you have any thoughts?
Oh, I absolutely agree with all those comments.
Okay. Just as a, to be an outlier and to throw something in there after everybody seems to be in agreement, are there materials that you would want them to never use, like corrugated tin? Well,
No.
I'm just, okay, they can use corrugated tin.
Yes.
Okay,
I
I'm just
think
asking.
Nowadays, there are so many opportunities that we shouldn't legislate aesthetics, for one, and there are just a lot of opportunities for things. If you use corrugated metal, it's a contemporary look, and it's going to be better than using some cheap siding or other options. I mean, I just don't see why we want to legislate any of that.
And you talked about the fact that these are accessory buildings, these are permanent fixtures, and the high property values in our community, and we should respect and treat folks, allow them to do what they want with that property.
Okay, Mike?
I basically agree with all of that. Like I said, I'm deferring to planning and zoning, who has delved into this a long time, and that's why they came up with 36-132C3, which allows people the chance to present a deviated plan to allow anything to be presented to the Board of Adjustments.
Okay. Okay,
My
before
only-
we leave this page, or is there anything else? It seems like we have a clear consensus that masonry requirements would not be included in any of the zoning districts listed. Okay? Okay, Bill? Very good. To page 3. Okay, page 3 is,
Yeah, Mayor, it's identical to Chapter 6, with the exception, the only thing that hasn't been addressed is the last piece on no masonry requirement, the special exceptions for mason requirements. So if you've removed the masonry requirements, then there's no need for a special exception.
okay?
Correct.
Okay. Does everybody agree? Okay. Before we leave this consideration of portable buildings and accessory buildings, does anyone have any additional comments or recommendations that we bring forward? Mike?
Just a procedural question. Does that mean that what we're going to get in our packet for next week is going to reflect what the conclusions that we came to here? Or are we going to have to go through and make formal motions and amendments and such like that? I would recommend that we instruct the staff to go ahead and incorporate this into the packet, into the ordinance, so that we don't have to relitigate this.
Yeah. That was what I thought the
Yeah,
intention was.
I think that that's a great idea, and without objection from council members to add something to their packet at this late date, we will include it, but if there is an objection by any council member as to the inclusion of the revisions that the consensus has arrived at this evening, I will pull the item from the agenda, because each one of you deserves to have an ample opportunity to review the changes. But if there is no objection on Monday evening, then if Bill has the time to get this, Bill, can you complete this project within the time provided?
It'll take us about 15 minutes tomorrow. And I would say that we withheld out of your Dropbox the accessory buildings, pending the outcome of tonight. I mean, this was the purpose, was to gain a consensus to some degree. So I would propose that we'll probably renumber it a little bit, but we'll retain the motions as presented, but then create a consensus document. You know, that would just be for background, but describe a consensus document. We'll present it, and it can be modified at the council meeting, but we'll take your, what I believe the consensus is, and I've written it all down, and we've got it on tape, and we'll provide that so you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Okay. Is everybody okay with going forward? Mike?
I'm okay with going forward on that. I just have one question, because I know that this was sent back in January because the council had made substantive changes, and the attorney said that it needed to go back to P and Z. I don't see anything that looks very substantive to the P and Z's recommendation. Is there anything in here that's going to cause us to have to go back to P and Z?
This is ostensibly what P and Z has recommended with minor modifications.
That's what I'm saying. I just thought that,
Yeah.
wanted to ask that.
The requirement to go to P and Z was really driven by the public notice and hearing requirements, which those discussion items were provided notice, and it was discussed, and so we've met that requirement.
Okay. There's nothing else on item 5.1. We're going to proceed to 5.2, discussion fiscal year 2017-2018 proposed budget. I want to thank everyone who came for the discussion concerning Chapter 6 and 36 of the City Code of Ordinances. I know that our people, that the council members would be interested in hearing your further input, and I want to thank Buddy Alleman for coming as the subject matter expert of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Thank you, Buddy.
And we're going to get Laura to, Zena, if we get Laura in here soon.
Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break while we wait on Laura. Without objection, 5-minute break. Okay, Bill? Discussion fiscal year 2017-2018, proposed budgets.
Well, Mayor, Laura and the staff and I got together. We took what we thought were some questions from council and things we needed to address, and we came up with 12 discussion topics, of which 4 of them came from Alderman Colmier, and a couple of them were questions that we're answering. So we've printed a copy, and so not everything is in, most everything that we're going to discuss is in this packet here. The only thing that is not in here that's in your Dropbox is the actual updated printout of the Encode budget piece. That's been updated, it's in your packet, and then pending the conclusion of this meeting, you can give us guidance that at the next council meeting you want it, or or the next at the next special meeting with its budget, which is the second Monday of September. So just before I get started, in the back of our minds, we've posted the agenda for the August 28th meeting. There is a discussion at the end of this as to whether or not a consensus is that we should have a further follow-on budget workshop after that meeting, because there may be or may not be unresolved issues. So hopefully we'll get through this. We'll have clear guidance. With any luck, we won't need that meeting, but if there's still some action items that we want to discuss that require staff research at the end of this, then we can add a special meeting, workshop meeting to follow the city council meeting. So that's what's going on. So the first one should be easy. It is, and we can go to the next slide, it's a consideration for adopting, before you adopt the town plan, a new vision statement and some tweaks to the strategic goals. And this was really input from citizens and several months of discussion, 2 or 3 months of discussion from P&Z. And so the easy ones are just some wordsmithing of the strategic goals there. You can see that there was, on goal number 2, they added "and secure environment." So it's a safe and secure environment. That seems to make sense to me. There was some wordsmithing on protect or preserve, and after a lot of discussion, we thought, well, we really want to preserve city property values, and then protect fiscal resources and maintain fiscal discipline. So you can see those are the 2 recommendations for there. There was actually a lot of discussion, a lot of input from citizens on the vision. And I think I passed to you, there was some questions as to, the urban energy and multi-generational hearings. We heard from the surveys that wasn't a clear understanding of that. We got several inputs for a proposed rewrite. Anyway, this is a proposed rewrite, which I think makes sense. And we looked at a lot of different city visions and other visions, and so I'll pause there. This is what, at this point in time, it's not been finalized by P&Z, but there's a consensus. And in fact, we asked them, is there a consensus to move this forward to adopt in the city budget? And there was from P&Z. They didn't take a vote on it, but I think that this is something that we can easily adopt in the budget, and I'm asking for your guidance.
Okay, does anybody have any comments, questions, concerns? Mike?
And do we want to put in the proposed rewrite a statement about providing superior service, public services, or is, I know it's down in the goals, but, so is that part of our vision, or is that getting too much in the weeds for the vision?
Some of that's a little bit in there.
So Laura makes a point that part of that is yes, it's goal number 1, provide excellent municipal service. The question was, would you put it in the vision? And she did point out to me that it is also covered in the mission statement. The mission statement reads, as the city of Chevelmsville Park provides exceptional leadership and delivers exemplary municipal services in a professional, cost-effective, and efficient manner to citizens, business owners, and visitors. So I can go either way. That you have it in your mission statement, you have it in your strategic goals. I do think that you want to consider, your vision statement at some point in time needs to be where you're moving to and where you're going. And there is there might be a tendency to add a lot into it, and that might, more may not be better, but I hadn't considered it, hadn't thought through it, I'm just off the cuff.
I think
Okay.
it's fine, the way it is, the way they're proposing it.
Okay, Mike, did you have some specific recommendation?
No,
Okay.
good idea.
Okay. Next bill?
Okay, Laura put this together, I'll turn it over to her, but there was a question as to whether we should adopt in the budget a consideration for the fact that we're probably going to accept more than 98.7% ad valorem taxes, which is what the effective tax worksheet was based upon. And so she put together two forms, and I'll let her discuss that. She can walk you through these forms and what that means.
Okay, so the first one, I guess we're all in our packet. There was discussion, so originally, let me go backwards. Originally, the city manager proposed budget, we used 98.83% as the collection rate, which is what's given to us in the effective and rollback rate calculation. So we use that same number when we're coming up with our proposed revenue. However, we are gonna collect more than that. It's, we always do, and you have the taxes that are in protest, the values that are in protest, they're not included in that number when you calculate your tax revenue. So, it was mentioned, what if we used 99.3? And so that's what this first page, that would give us an additional 13,768 in general fund revenue. Or if we just went with 100%, that would be at 36,209. Now, you're going to collect more, you are going to collect more because obviously those taxes from the ones that are in protest, it's just the way you do the calculations, you just don't include those. So, it's just a thought. Can we go any way we want? You could tell the tax office to change the number in the calculation. However, that's dangerous because if it fluctuates every year when they gave us the number, and if we decide to do a different number and it comes out over or above, it can hurt us next year on the debt side. Because that's where they figure the debt, because you have to collect 100% of your debt. So the number they used was 98.83. So then to make 100%, they make it up, that's where your debt rate increases slightly so that you collect 100%, taking into account the few that aren't going to pay, which isn't going to happen here.
So our recommendation is just to make this reflected as to whatever percentage you want, it will just reflect that as additional revenue in the budget. And so that's really simple, but it accurately reflects what we expect to get in revenues based upon citizens. Is probably a good point. So we can go either way.
Okay,
Just
so-
we're looking
so
for a
let-
consensus of which one.
Let me say what I think I just heard you say. We're going to collect debt service money, and that's going to go into a sinking fund, and it's dedicated to debt service exclusively. However, by choosing a number higher than the Bexar County number, we're going to collect additional revenue, and that additional revenue number will be reflected in our total collection number, even though part of that money is going to be going into the debt service fund, because
Yeah, so we're not going to collect any more or less because of this action. This is simply a reflection on our budget as to what we more realistically expect to collect.
Our estimated, so when we do the analysis and you get your taxable value, we estimated for the general fund revenue that we were going to collect 98.83. Doesn't change the calculations at all. So it's just the budget for the city manager, the projected revenue.
The question that I have is that 98%, that 98.3?
98.83.
Oh, 83. It comes from Bexar County, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It comes, it's in the calculation for the debt service piece, the debt rate.
Right. So the question I have is, what is your recommendation? Because it's a form over substance argument.
Here, you could go with 100, we're fine. At other cities I've been at, that rate typically is like a 82, 87. And if you were to use a way higher number, you know, you could be hurting your general fund revenues. They're not gonna come in. Here, we don't have that problem. We could use 100.
Are we collecting 100%?
Yeah, well, yes. Well, because see, again, the people that are in protest aren't included in this calculation at all.
And they are likely to pay taxes.
Yeah, they're gonna pay taxes, it's just that, in the effective rate calculation, they're not included when they come up with the effective and the rollback rate, and those people will pay. I mean,
So it's almost like gravy in a sense. You're gonna get it, but you don't necessarily account for it. And then when you get it, it's kind of like gravy. Even though we
can, yeah.
technically know we're more than likely gonna get the 100% because of where we live and who the taxpayers are here. So it really doesn't matter, but I'm of the mind to say to go with what Bear County gives us.
Mike?
I understand that Bear County comes up with their own number, and that's, nope. I understand they come up with their own numbers. But I think that our budget document ought to be as accurate as we can make it. And if we realistically anticipate collecting 100%, then I think that's what our budget document ought to say, because it's not going to affect anything that Bear County does, or BCAD does, and it won't affect anything that the tax collector assessor does. It just is a more accurate document for us to work with and to present to our citizens. So I think at least the 99.3, I don't know where that number came from, but it sounds like a good number. I would
That came
have
from
no
you,
problem
Mike.
with, oh, that's right, thank you.
You gave that to us.
I've slept since then.
Yeah, well, we're not as young as we used to be, but that was your number.
But I could go with 100, seeing as that's really close to what we get, so that our budget documents are more accurate rather than going in lowballing it, and that's non-pejorative, just less than we really believe that we're going to collect.
Okay. Anybody else have a comment? Just to go back to Mary Ann's comment, and I like the idea of you have the well-worn path and you have a governmental agency that's making recommendations. Laura is quite an expert in this field, and, you know, Laura, I hope you're with us 5 years from now, but if Laura's not here 5 years from now, following Mary Ann's observation about the Bear County approach, we're not going to get caught short because we followed the Bear County approach, and we're going to more likely than not have somebody that understands what Bear County said, but they're not going to understand it as well as Laura does. Laura is more of a subject matter expert, and we're very fortunate in that regard. And so, Mary Ann, I think that your observation is a very well, you know, I understand that.
Well, the observation, I think what Laura said was go ahead and go with the 100. But to be clear, I'm not relying on any governmental entity because I wouldn't. I'm relying more on a Dave Ramsey mindset, if you know who that is.
Anybody else? 199.3, which one we want to go with? Bob?
Well, I was just going to comment that I agree with the comments earlier. I have trouble, you know, I think it's impressive if we really can say we collect 100%, but I just, you know, I have trouble believing that. I really kind of like the 99.3 as a number, but, you know, I'm going to defer to Laura on that, but I would be supportive of either one, but it just seems hard to think that we really get 100% of every tax revenue.
Okay. Mike?
I think I heard Laura say that she would be comfortable with 100%. I mean, if that's what we get, and that's fine, I'll defer to her. I mean, 99.3 does sound like a good figure, but like Mr. Simpson said, if 100% is what we get, then we ought to try and reflect it as accurate as possible. But I'm kind of the new kid on the block here on this, and these are a little outside my purview to a certain extent, and I'll defer to Laura on it, whatever she feels is the best. That's the way I look at it.
Michelle?
I agree. I mean, think 100% works, and we can go with 100%. We've gone with higher numbers before.
Again, you have your people that are in protest, they're gonna pay, I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
they're gonna pay at least what they paid last year. They may not pay what the, the valuations may have gone up on, but, and so those are not in here, so you're gonna collect at least the 36,000 extra.
Okay, so 100%. Okay, Bill?
The next item is updated projected general fund balance. I'm gonna turn it over to Laura.
Okay, so I went ahead and did because there were some questions that were actually really good questions. This one page, the general fund that has the 3 different columns, I went ahead and put a projected in there for illustration purposes. We won't put that in the budget because it's constantly changing, and usually you have in your budget document your amended current budget versus your new budget. So, but what we have here on your, for the first column, you have the amended budget. The second column, you have projected. So what we are showing is that the beginning of the year, for the 16-17 year, our fund balance is $2,438,048. We've increased revenue to projected for, it's increased, excuse me, I didn't write that down. Well, I've got it now at $5,502,944, and it was at $5,328,000. The majority of that, as we talked about, was some of the property tax and building permits.
Just for the audience, this is page 2, and we don't have page 1 projected. So if you're trying to follow, I'm sorry, we didn't add this. I'm sorry.
And so then, again, we projected the expenses. So what we're looking at right now, we're projecting revenue over expenses of $194,797. And so that's going to increase your ending fund balance to $2,632,845. So if you flip to the next page, which is the one that's on the screen, which is very hard to read, I have that in there as your projected unaudited fund balance to show your percent of fund balance remaining based on the current proposed budget.
Okay, Mike?
Now, these are before we did the 100% collection, right? So it'll change by about $36,000?
The revenue, yeah, this does not have, yeah.
So just to clarify, that means that the ending fund balance is projected to be $2.48 million.
No, the second column, 2.632.
Yeah, so
No, I meant at the end of
Yeah.
the 2017, 2018,
Yeah.
you're projecting that the number is going to fall to $2.48 million.
now, the 2016-17 budget that we currently are operating now projects it at 2.4, but what Laura says is she's gone into the revenues and the expenses, even after the last council meeting, updated what we project to be the ending balance, and so then therefore, that's updated now to to add an additional $194,000 into the fund balance. Then when she moves that to the third column, which is the beginning fund balance for the 17-18 budget, you'll see there's a 2.632845 at the beginning fund balance. So the last time we showed you that, we didn't use the projected real world inbound, we just used the projected budget number. So this is a more accurate number to where we really think we're going to start the year with about $2.6 million. Then you add in the projected revenue and the expenses, and then that leaves a projected fund balance of
2.507.
yeah, 2.5, because we're taking 124,000 basically out of fund balance to reimburse capital and other things. So based upon also the discussion and what seemed to be a consensus at the last meeting, which is let's move the crack seal machine for Public Works up this year. The original proposal was to fund it half, and then half this year, and then half next year. We've taken the liberty in this proposal, I know that's the next agenda item, to say that if you take that from fund balance and you pay for it this year, then you're going to need $124,000 in fund balance to pay. And so that's going to lower your ending fund balance to $2.5 million. Now, Alderman Simpson has said, well, now that doesn't include the change from 98.8 to 100%, so there'll be
36,000.
there'll be a 36,000 that will be less, so it'll be less than 100,000 transfer fund balance. And that accounts for everything that you've given us guidance to fund next year. And so then when you look at that and you look at the next page, which is what's on the screen up there,
I still don't understand, Mike, Bill. I thought that I thought the adjustment that we've just agreed to at the 100% is an adjustment in the 2017, 2018, and it has nothing to do with the 2.632845 number.
it doesn't. And what's going to happen, though, is your revenue total, right below that, the 5.4407, that'll add up approximately another 136. There'll be another 36,000 in there.
So our projected fund balance at the end of the year goes up. Yeah, okay.
Yes, of next year.
Okay.
Yes, Mayor, you're correct. So then if you look at the projected fund balance that we're projecting now based upon the 2017-18 budget, let's just say it's 2.5 million and some change, then you're really going to look at, it's going to be somewhere about 48% of fund balance. You'll have a fund balance which is 48% of your total budget. That number is not, I didn't use a calculator, but it's between 45 and 50, which is under the 50% fund balance requirement that the policy requires. So that's an update. If you have any questions, we can get further clarification. There wasn't any required guidance or issues associated with that. That number will change based upon what is funded and what is defunded in the budget. But we want to give you an update on that. Thank you, Laura, for doing that. I think that's makes it more accurate. Any questions on that?
Okay.
And the next item is we received guidance to move the crack seal machine to fully fund it this year. And I'm going to turn it over to Laura. She's going to talk about the options for how we can do that. There's really about two options. But I'm going to steal her thunder. She's opting for the simplified option because you're really taking it from the same pot of money and you're calling it different things, and there's a simple way to do it and a more complicated. So what she's got is the equipment replacement schedule, and I'll turn it over to her.
So we kind of went over that last time, and I kind of said, okay, so, because the discussion made me, we kind of led to y'all were like, we'll take it out of capital, but there's only, the way we originally did this, there's only 7,982 currently in capital. 7,000 for the crack seal, which we moved from the seal coat machine. So the remainder is coming from us putting money future, and then the rest of it coming from the general fund balance. So it's really except for the 7,000, it's all coming from fund balance in a different way. So it makes me have to make several different entries. So it would be easier, we just say we're gonna take the entire 50, reallocate the 7,000 and the 22,000, for which is future, which we haven't approved yet, which is what we did on this next sheet. So you can see we moved the 7,982, which is in the current year that we're in now. We moved it to the Public Works Director truck, which, or as we talked about, may actually become a different, we may reallocate some of the trucks and buy a different truck for the crews. Still up for discussion. And then the 22,000 that originally been that's future set aside, that hasn't happened yet, we allocated it among some of the current items, trucks, and so it didn't change the bottom dollar, which was 61,419 being put into capital in the 17-18 future budget.
And we reallocated all that within the Public
Within-
Works Director.
yeah, so-
And so,
Didn't change.
so it's,
It really is, the money's, it's in kind of all the same in the end. It's just that, for me, I have to make several different entries to move money forwards, backwards.
It's just an accounting.
Michelle?
Yeah, so it really is all, in the end, it makes one entry, it's coming from fund balance.
Doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
Simplified adjusting journal entry.
Yeah.
Sounds great. If you can explain it to our auditors.
Again, we didn't change the bottom dollar. We didn't change how much we're putting into capital. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
okay, so I'm gonna, this is the time of the meeting where I'm gonna take care of one of our staff members, and you can go home and visit your kids, right? Curtis, right? I'm gonna release you from here.
Has more than one?
So at the last meeting,
Wife has two, but he has one.
in the workshop, there was a discussion of renaming and rescoping the position of the planner information systems manager to the city manager. Council's guidance was they wanted more information on that and for me to present that. So I've included in your packet a number of things. A city by city comparison of 19 cities or 18 other cities plus us. A proposed duty description with track changes, a clean version so it would be easier to read. I didn't ask Curtis to do anything in terms of adding any new documents, but I did ask him to, well, I included his annual performance accomplishments, which he did last year. So he didn't adjust that at all. He turned that into Xena for his evaluation. But I thought it was it replicated the vast array of duties that he had. And I asked Steve Werling to give an individual pay model recommendation, which is included, and then I proposed organizational chart. And this organizational chart is a change in the proposal so that it's not parallel to the directors, but it's a subline under the city manager. So I just want to back up again a little bit. We created this position to fill a void primarily in the administration of information and IT support, but we also added a planner title to that. That's kind of an Army thing, to be honest with you, because we have planners in the Army that assist these kinds of things. But as you all know, we made significant gains in transparency, efficiency, and cost savings to be achieved in the IT and the public information piece. And it's hard to understate this. Just the fact that we were able to relieve Chief Naughton of the responsibilities of IT probably saves him 30% of his time. I don't know, I didn't coordinate that with him, but I can tell you that any time we had any issue with any computer, Chief Naughton was here behind the scenes, spending hours in every.
Excuse me, one little correction to that. He was the IT person.
Yes.
He was here 24/7. We now have a paid company that
Yes.
does our IT, which
Yes.
is different. So
It-
it's not taking 30% of someone's time, or
Yeah.
shouldn't be.
And that's one of the things, that's a good point, and I don't mean to overstate it, but Curtis is that link into that IT piece. I can tell you that this isn't about him, but with Curtis, and as well as what would be probably any hire, there's a learning curve, and then once you learn that, then there's efficiencies gained, and there's other tasks that can be piled on. We enjoy the talents of that position, and in Curtis's role has increased, as it should, because he helped set up the IT contract. That takes a lot of duties from him, but he still spends a lot of time on that, and that frees him up to do other things. Not to exaggerate, but city secretary and city manager rely on him to do a lot of things. The public works director, the police chief, the fire chief, many of the staff summary sheets that have been provided with police chief's name on it, fire chief's name, public works names, were largely written by Curtis to a degree as an assistant in a position. under their guidance based upon what they said. Everything from SCADA RFPs to, I mean, I said that right again, the SCADA RFP, the statements of qualifications, the very technical things that we compete and bid on. Curtis has a big hand into that. Ultimately, what that is that frees me up from doing that and Zena from doing that. Allows us to focus on a higher level of task proficiency and accomplishment. And again, I'll refer to the matrix. You all have it in your package. It's the first attachment. I'm going to tell you that there's 19 other cities on the staff. I have verified, I think, with 16 of the 19. I had one verified today. So there's a couple of them that I have not been able to verify, but I went on the website and I believe them to be 90% correct. Of the 18 other cities besides Chavano Park, 16 of them have a deputy city manager or an assistant city manager, an assistant to the city manager or a assistant to the city administrator, an executive assistant or some other type of assistant that performs those tasks. In addition, most cities have one of the following. These categories are broad. They have a development planner, they have a EDC, they have a community development services, they have some sort of person, position, or organization that deals externally with integrating with developers and planning and platting and P&Z and so forth. Most cities have a dedicated, and they don't, this title doesn't fit, but they have a dedicated person that does IT or a dedicated person that does communications or a dedicated person that does public affairs. Many cities have two or some have three. And I didn't get into that detail. I'm just kind of conceptually showing you that all cities are different. There are different sizes, there are different needs, but the functions are the same requirements at different levels. And so I guess my conclusion of this is, and I don't mean to be blunt, but I'm not just making this up. This isn't for me. This is for the city. The fact that it says title to the city manager is more of a tradition, and it's more reflective of that role. You can see in the job description, I'm moving to the change tracker. There's not a lot of change into it, but there's been some clarifications, and I tried to write this in terms of what the position is currently doing now. And this reflects what is currently being done. We didn't change the fact that he's got three major tasks. He manages the city's information technology systems. And he's the interface. He's not the IT guy. We have an IT system, but he does a lot himself. He manages the city communications requirements, which is a city manager function and part of the strategic communications plan. And he performs operational planning tasks in support of the city manager and city secretary. That line did not change one bit. We added some clarifying bullets in there. In your packet, again, I'm not going to go over all his performance objectives, but it's pretty impressive. I didn't add up all the savings that he's done, but $10,000 a year on IT savings alone. He is continually looking at innovative ways to consolidate our networks and our requirements. That was just the phone and IT stuff, and there was something else he told me today with the police and fire that he's saving. So there's a recommendation. I told you, I briefed you last time that Curtis and I have been talking about this for months, but he approached me as that this was kind of culmination time for him. And he had requested a pay grade change up to 28. In consultation with Steve Werling, Steve's recommendation was not to accept that, but to lower that to a pay grade 26. And then he provided me with a individual pay model worksheet, which you can see there, which targets his pay at $54,000. And then finally, there's the organizational chart, which doesn't put it on a line similar on the same level of directors, but puts it kind of as a side note to the city manager. I can talk any of these in further degrees if you want. I can answer your questions. What I'm proposing to do is answer your questions, and to then, if you've seen the agenda for the next meeting, this flow chart, this organizational chart is on there. This position would be included in that for approval of City Council. There's been some other changes to the chart. We've updated it based upon the police. We've updated it, and we've added actually the numbers per slot, and there's been some other changes in here which we will describe in your staff summary sheet in the staff summary. But as part of the budget, this is a budget document. This has budget implications, and I'm requesting your support on this. I'll pause.
Okay, I know that several of the council members, maybe all of us, would like to have seen this as part of the salary study as opposed to a one-off item. As a community, we would be cautious of having one-off items. However, in Bill's defense, this is a one-off item that is coming to us within the budget cycle, as opposed to it's now October, we're into our budget cycle, and we have a one-off item, and I'm recommending that you consider it. So I'm sensitive to what Bill's position is, that he's bringing this to us not in the most efficient time, but certainly in a timely manner for all of us to consider this. It's not like we have put away the budget and now we're looking at budget amendments and trying to get our heads around this issue. The question is, as a community, do we need somebody that functions at the level of Curtis to make us the best team from an administrative standpoint and in support of all of the other departments in our community? And Bill, could you address that a little bit at 20,000 feet before we go to the council members?
Well, I would just say that it's his decision. He's the CEO. It's his decision. And it's not something for us to get down in the weeds about. What I would have liked to have seen is, how much is this going to cost? If this is something that you say you need, we as a council can now ask you questions about, to support that. You tell me why you need that, but my main question is, how much is it going to cost? What do you need in the budget? You're the CEO, you say you need this. Okay, tell me how much it's going to cost.
Yeah, I did address, I'm sorry, I apologize. I did address that last meeting, and it's a little under $9,000. It's $8,000, and I don't have the exact number over what he's paid now. So, you know, he's going to get a 3.1% raise, which isn't that much, but this would, and as I mentioned last time, in my assessment, this is commensurate with the responsibilities and the role that he provides, and it's he's proven himself. And you know, I'm not encouraging him to leave. I think that this will, this is really going to be able to stabilize him here for a few more years until he gets that itch. But when he does, and he will, because he wants to be a city manager and he has interviewed for that, been a finalist, there will be a void, and I would intend to fill that position with an assistant to the city manager. I mean, that is going to best posture this city for the continuity and the skill set that you're going to need to run through that. So it's, to answer your question, it's a little less than $9,000. You know, people ask me all the time about my job and how I do it, and I tell them this is a very hard job. It's a harder job than I had in the Army, and part of that is because of the size of the staff and the complexity of the issues. And you got to have some smart people around you, and we do. We are blessed to have the best city secretary that I know of in the region. You know, the best finance director for what we got going on, and the talent that we have with Chief Lacey and Naughton, but they're all busy. I mean, every one of them work exceedingly hard. And so, you know, this doesn't fix everything, but again, this keeps us where we're at, and we're making incremental changes for improvement. City of Chavano Park wants exceptional city services, and you expect it. You want a staff that is competent and not bumbling around on their budget and IT and email systems going down and vulnerabilities. And so I think this is a step towards that.
Mike?
Yeah, sorry.
The question I have is on the title, Assistant to the City Manager. Now, basically, you've taken Brandon, who was our IT guy, and you've basically kind of moved him.
Curtis. Brandon, we love you where you are. You're perfect.
Stay there, buddy. Curtis, and you've kind of moved him into this position. Now, the question I have is, by calling it the Assistant City Manager, it seems like that would be kind of something that a city manager would kind of like to determine on his own. Now, as long as you're here, and I hope that's a long, long time, that's fine, but what if we put somebody in here and then we have a new city manager and he does not get along with this guy, and he's now the assistant of the city manager? I mean, I don't know if there's something can be done about that, but by putting that title in there like that, it kind of locks it into that, doesn't it?
There is something that can be done about that. The city manager deals with it.
Well, and reorganize, and, that would be relatively easy to fix. I do plan on staying around for a little while. But when I came in here, just like everyone that I know, they're going to make an assessment of what your strengths and weaknesses are and your capabilities. And some make moves fast and some make them slower.
Well,
Mike, we'll go to Simpson, then we'll come back to you, Mike.
okay. Well, I'm just continuing the same thought on Mary Ann, that, yeah, a new city manager can come in and do what he wants, but what if he comes in and says, okay, I want to move this guy back to IT, and now I want a city manager, assistant city manager? He can recommend that. I'm just saying, by doing this, I don't know, I'm not saying that there's nothing that can be done, that a city manager can't do anything and recommend. He is the CEO, and I that's all fine. I'm just saying, maybe this could be just titled something a little differently to not give the impression down the road. It's just a suggestion.
And, forgive me if I was jumped on you. I didn't mean to. I don't have it's not personal. It's just, that's what we hire him to do. That's what we hire he or she down the road to do. They're in charge of personnel, and that's their job, and they will deal with it. And the people, whoever's sitting on council to hire Bill's replacement will make those tough decisions and hire somebody who can handle that. And I get your point, but I think it's, that's what you hire the city manager to deal with.
I agree.
My opinion.
I agree. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying that could eliminate something down the road that's a problem. It may not be a problem. You got a valid point, and I agree with it. Let him handle it, I guess, is the bottom line. Whoever's there, whoever's on the hot seat gets it.
Okay, Mike.
If you look at the chart, you'll notice that every city but Olmos Park has one of these. As an alumnus of that city manager position, wow, would I have loved to have an assistant that I could task these things to. If that's what he's doing and he's earning his keep, worker is worthy of his hire. So I'm all for it. You want it. You include it in your budget. It's the right time. Let's go for it.
Michelle?
While I respect what you're requesting, I always have to bring up this clarification. In the list of the cities, we aren't equal to most of those cities that have deputy assistant city managers. They're much bigger budgets, and so I can understand them requiring it. Most of them have executive or some other assistant, so I kind of am like Mike about the title of it. I think you're making it assistant to the city manager because that's what he'd like it to be, so he could be a city manager, and I want it to be a position that works for the city, that other people coming in can have, not one that we create because we want somebody to stay. And so I think it should be an administrative assistant position, not an assistant to the city manager. But the other thing about that is, if you look at the title, or if you look at the job description under job summary, it says, under city manager direction is responsible for providing support services to the city manager in the managerial, administrative, and technical functions. I thought this position was not gonna have any managerial authority whatsoever.
I'm going to go to change document here. Is responsible for providing support services. So I would qualify that as it's not to manage. You know, he does manage our IT. He has that title now as the IT program manager, the information systems manager. But this is this was written to provide support services in those areas.
I just want
So-
to make sure that's perfectly clear for the rest of your staff.
Yeah, okay, I'll look at that and I'll look to clarify that.
And then yes, you can request anything you want, just like you do when you need, equipment and whatever, but it's our decision to decide whether or not it's something we want to spend money in the budget for. I don't think $9,000 is going to break our bank, but again, I wish we'd found out about it sooner, and I still have the concern that we're trying to placate a person instead of a position.
Okay, anybody else have any comments? Mary Ann?
I guess what I would just say is I want us to let the city manager manage. We either trust his ability or we don't. We're elected to deal with policy and the budget, not micromanaging about titles and duties, and I think we should let him do that. It is the budget cycle, and let him make his case. If we agree, vote yay. If you don't, vote no.
Well, it sounds like the consensus is that, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that the consensus is to let Bill make the change, that we will receive his flow chart, his organizational chart at our next meeting. We will have the opportunity to approve it, but that a consensus is to include this as a budgetary item as in our next draft of the budget. Okay? Bill?
Thank you. And I probably could have just made the change, but I don't think that would have been good practice. I'm trying to be transparent. I apologize for the timing of that, and I recognize that I probably could have done it different. There was some justification for that, primarily just to close the loop on this and move on to the next topic, because we're putting together the budget and it just wasn't convenient. Okay. The next item that came up in discussion was related to whether or not we wanted to fund emergency generators for the fire's EOC, which is really the living quarters, and the Public Works building, which serves now as the primary SCADA piece. So staff had identified both the Public Works Director and the Fire Chief for a number of years, but now the Public Works Director to provide backup generator. So my conclusion is there's a legitimate need, but it wasn't something that I thought we needed to move on this year. So we put it in the capital replacement fund so we can work towards that funding objective. And then there was the question, well, would we be able to, under the authorizations under the Crime Control Prevention District budget, under the local government code that governs that, would we be able to fund it this year, pull that up by using those funds? So we wanted to have a discussion on that. What I asked Laura to do was to pull an extract of that chapter, and you can see that we've included some of that. And starting on the first page, subchapter D, powers and duties, there's the program may include police and law enforcement related programs, including, and then there is a number of topics, which it's not all inclusive, and it's there's nothing in there that says backup generator. I mean, and so one of the questions was, well, if there was truly an emergency and you had a declared state of emergency and you were operating out of there, then probably prevention. You know, say there was a big tornado or a series of fires that occurred and it swept across a section of the city. Oftentimes there is looting and there is a requirement to maintain order and discipline and prevent crime in those vulnerable times. So probably we could do this. Now, I'm going to ask Chief Naughton here to talk about this in a minute, so be thinking about that. We kind of talked about funding sources, and we can make a case that we could fund this with the Crime Control Prevention District. You're going to see in your council packet, which you probably, if you looked at the agenda, you saw it, but you didn't understand really what it was. There's a Bexar County hazardous, it's not a hazardous, it's a hazard mitigation program, which really talks about emergency services. About a year ago, we came to the council and said, hey, Bexar County is going to put together one of these plans. They've offered to include all the municipalities in the area. Do we want to participate? We got concurrence, and that was real easy. We don't have to develop our own plan. We just integrate into their plan, and they do that. So they've approved the plan. We've provided input. There's a section on Chavano Park. But in discussion with Chief, that allows us to compete with grants. And so that also allows Bexar County to go in at one stroke to ask for a $50 million grant, of which then they reapportion periods of stuff for that. So there's that option. Then there's also the option that we can apply for a grant ourselves. And so we'll defer to council any way you want. I'll ask Chief to kind of talk about that more, but we're okay with doing it this year, but we're also okay with trying to fund it a year with a grant, and if it doesn't work, then coming back and revisiting. Is that something is that about how we talked about it?
It is. I would say that any funding that's already in the capital program to use for this generator, we should be able to use to apply for a grant, see if we can get this thing at a 95.5 grant. But the idea of the generator is to be able to stand up an EOC if we have to, and power off of that generator a leg over to Brandon, power his SCADA system if the power goes off, to keep the city's water wells up and running, which is important to us for fire. But we put it in for full funding. I think there's a chance it's one of those items that's easily fundable if you can find somebody that will fund a standalone city. Part of the thing you're going to see Monday with this Bexar County Hazard Mitigation Grant, it's just a grant. They asked us for some items. We put some items in. They're going to write a grant. Generator's not in it. It's not in their scope for that. But there are some other grants out there that may be able to fund it. So we don't have to fund it totally. But it's an important piece of equipment that we really need to get in place because we don't have anything. I mean, we can take a portable generator off the truck, but that takes it off the truck.
So you can have a discussion. We can answer questions. We've operated without it, but we do think at some point in time we need to do that. And the question is it important enough to bring it forward this year? Do we want to put something in the capital replacement and let us go compete for a grant? And there's probably not a right answer, but we can do it either way you want.
Okay.
We had proposed partially funding it in capital replacement this year. What?
Well, last time it's on it.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any thoughts after hearing more information on this? Bob?
It sounds like to me that it's fairly important to you guys, and I think after hearing the last couple of meetings we've had, it seems to me that we need to have this. How confident, I guess what I would say is I think we do need to have in the capital replacement whatever we can do now, but how confident are we in the grant process? Do you think would your recommendation be to go forward with funding it, but waiting to see how the grant comes through? What do you, how confident do you think?
Personally, I would put money into the capital. It didn't get broke overnight. It's not gonna get fixed overnight. It is important. Castle Hills had to stand up their EOC recently on a generator that is non-existent. They had to take it off the truck, put a truck there, run it. Leon Valley did theirs 2 weeks ago on power, had to stand up an EOC. It is something that we are gonna have to do eventually. I think that if we put money from capital in this year for whatever portion y'all see fit to put in, and let us apply for grants, we may have a good in for grant writing for emergency management stuff coming into the fire department, an asset that wants to come and be part of us. And if we can get it, we certainly want to use grant funds to do it. And I would say that if you have capital, set aside whatever portion of the generator you're gonna put in there, put it in this year. If we can get a grant, a matching grant or something, let us use that money to pay the matching grant whenever we can get it. And if we can't get it, you build it up over X years and we get it then. I mean, the sky isn't falling on this, but it is important. That is the EOC. And
Okay.
it will be, if power goes out, it will power the skater, which right now will not be when power.
Okay, now, correct me if I'm wrong, earlier in the evening, we found $36,000 that was not in the budget, but is now in the budget. How much are we looking at? What is a recommendation as far as a down payment on this or a matching grant number that would be for a 3-to-1 ratio or whatever ratios we might think we're going to get on something like this?
I think most grants are 5.95, 90/10, something like that. I will say that in the original proposal, it's probably gonna be a little bit more if we have to tunnel over to Brandon and put something in Brandon's office, but
The cost was, total cost is what?
we put $25,000 to set the generator, and that's us doing most of the work, with buying the generator and roads hooking it up.
Well, free money is always better than our money. Council identified with Alderman Simpson's revision to the budget on money that we expect to collect anyway, $36,000. And, you know, there's certainly, whatever y'all think, there's money available is what we did earlier in the evening. So, and Bill didn't have that money when he prepared the budget the first time. Does anybody want to set some money into this so that we can start the grant process and have some money? Mike?
I would like to see us go ahead and put it in the budget for fully funding it, go for the grant, and if we don't get the grant, then we've got it in the budget. We don't have to go back and do a budget amendment. If we get the grant, then we can take the money that's in the budget and move it to capital replacement somewhere. That would be, and it's like I said last time, you don't need, it's like a pistol. You don't need it until you need it badly, and then it's a little bit late to try to get it. So that would be my recommendation for an approach. Go ahead and fund it in the budget. Go for the grant. If we don't get the grant, then go ahead and buy it.
Okay, anybody else have any thoughts? Mike?
I basically agree with Mike on that one. There is kind of another side of this on the public works. Brandon will have to help me with this. How many of our wells are actually on a generator? So in case of a power failure, I know Trinity's not.
Well, they're actually, it's 2 drive shafts that actually are on, so we have to physically come up here and start it. They don't automatically kick over when we lose power.
That's the one at,
All of us that have that as well, 8 here.
right. That's the only one. So none of the 1, 6, 5, 9, those are all out. Chavano, the main tower at Chavano, all that is out of service in case of a power failure. How does that, I mean, now fortunately, it's 8 that has the generator, correct?
Correct.
And that's our biggest well, I think. So that's plenty of water, that can get it uphill if it were on the far end for a fire, I mean,
Yes, because the drive shaft that's at Heber is connected to the largest pump that we have, which is 125 horsepower.
Okay.
Which can get it all the way up to the,
Okay.
can get it up to the elevated, and the elevated can hold on as
Okay.
far as keeping the pressure on the north side.
okay, because I mean, if we don't have water, then it really doesn't do a whole lot of good to have emergency services for fire. I mean, no, I agree with Mr. Simpson, we ought to go ahead and put this in the budget this year.
Okay, anybody else have any comments? Any recommendations? Okay. Next item, Bill.
The next item was funding fire hydrant repair. And that was a question as to whether or not we had it funded out of the water budget, but it's really a requirement for fire protection. And so I just wanted to close the loop back with you. It wasn't a big ticket item. I think we had allocated a couple $1,000s. And so I'm back briefing you now to tell you that we're going to move that funding line from the water department to the general fund. And I'm just closing the loop on that. And so I don't think there's any questions on that. If someone is alarmed by that and that wasn't your understanding, then let me know now.
Okay. Item 8, proposed shaded fuel break.
So 8, 9, and 10, and 11 are, and 12 are Alderman Colmeyer. I got that right.
Yes, you did, thank you.
Thank you.
I kind of backed into this clumsily. I think I've tried to explain it, my thoughts on this in the proposal that I worked up and showed some examples. I'm not proposing building anything on the municipal track. I'm just trying to see that it's not a fire hazard. And if you've walked through it, it's a mess. Dagny Florine mentioned a letter. I wrote that letter 6 years ago. I never mailed it, never signed it. But I'm sure it's going to come back to haunt me now. So I'm going to own up to it. But I did write that letter. It was just it was something I was considering doing at that time, and I never mailed it, never did anything with it. But she did. She was sent a copy. She mentioned it in her citizens to be heard. No, it's not in the record. She just didn't name me as the author, which is, I thought was thoughtful. But I'm sure I'll be named sooner or later. So that's what it is. We talked to Logan Scherschel of the Forestry Service. We can get most of this done as a grant. The proposal is to do a fuel break, which is, I think I originally called it a fire break, which the difference between a fire break and a fuel break is significant. A fire break is basically clear cut. We're talking about getting rid of ladder fuel somewhere along a path in the rear of the municipal tract. Probably, I don't know, Mike, maybe 50 to 60 feet, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, they're not very wide some of them are 100 foot, I mean up to 100, but he said it can be, it just depends. And we would leave I propose that we would leave a significant natural barrier between the residents there. But this will allow the firefighters to move their equipment through the back of the property to fight a fire. If we get a full canopy fire in there, which I don't think we'd ever have, but we probably couldn't stop it with this. But if those dropped cedars and everything that are in there get caught, they're gonna go up really fast. I don't know if any of y'all ever seen those cedars go up, but I've been involved in a few of those in the past, and they're impressive to see how fast they will spread in those dead cedars. And that's what most of is in there. The cedars are choking out all of the good trees. I had some pictures of invasive trees that are basically choking out the live oaks. The cedars are growing up underneath them and intertwining. The seedling, there's no natural light in there. This is just simply to clean it up a little bit on that path. That's all I'm recommending. I'm not saying we do fire-wise in the whole property. I think we just need to put a path in there so that we can defend the city hall and the residents along Bikeway in Elm Springs. And that's what it is. That has nothing to do with exactly anything. That's just a concept of a swatch. And the software I used, when I went horizontal, it kind of went thin for some reason. I just didn't really want to figure it out. The little wavy kind of line coming in no particular order going up, that just moves along the existing well 6 access path. Well 6 is in that back corner. And then I've had a lot of people complain about, that it's kind of messy along Days of Vala, and the idea that Logan had given us was what he called is an improved entry, and all that is just taking the first, 15 feet, 10 feet, whatever, along that fence line, and pulling all of the underbrush out and bringing it up to about 6 or 8 feet onto the canopy of the trees, which just gives you a little break coming back off Days of Vala, a little more of an improved look, like along with we did with the Firewise over between here and the 911 center. That looks pretty nice in there. That's pretty much what the fuel break is. If we want to stop there and kind of go over anything on that. I mean, I don't have a whole lot of deals. I don't have any plans. There's no idea of a path. It has to be set by a GPS. The Forestry Service will come out and do all that. There was an additional thought that when I originally brought it up, that we would get this all done by the Forestry Service, and we probably still can. I did speak to Logan after I talked to the fire chief about it a little bit. We probably still can get them to cover most of it under a grant. They have to apply for it. The grants come up, the new grant period starts on September 1st, so it can't even be put into play until then. We may have to supply 1 or 2 people from, or maybe more, whatever we can supply, and volunteers, maybe 1 or 2 employees to help, not with the cutting, but with moving the debris to the chippers. I'm perfectly willing to volunteer to help. It doesn't bother me. It's my understanding that they will just lay the mulch will basically be scattered along the ground, along the path. I don't think it's going to be available for anything, but that could be something there. I did put in some stuff on here from the links that Logan sent me, basically explaining what difference between a fuel break and a fire break, and some ideas on that. Actually, he's got here maintain a minimum width of 60 feet, 100 feet on slopes, and then I had some other downloaded stuff on here about some examples, and what they kind of before and after pictures. I'm not proposing building anything. I'm not proposing laying any concrete anywhere. I am not proposing developing. I am not proposing anything but taking away a hazard to the city, in my opinion. And while we were talking about it, he mentioned that when they did the Firewise last year with the fire department, that a chainsaw class had come up, and it's a little more involved than I originally had thought, and that's just really something I don't even know if we can spend the time to do it, but that's kind of be up to the fire chief, maybe Public Works, and the city manager. That can be covered a lot by a grant, but there is the costs of the instructors per diem to come in and do it, and it's 4 days, Mike? I think it's 4 days, so it's fairly more involved than I was led to believe. So I don't know if that's something that we want to do or not. And he also said that we could probably, getting back to the fuel break, that he might be able to include doing some improving to the well 6 access path, but that's, that all depends on what he can get in a grant. And all this, of course, is dependent on a grant. I've always thought that something to have a water feature for the animals. That was in my letter of 5 years ago. I've never brought it up since. I just thought if we can do this fire break or fuel break, a water feature to help keep animals on the track and keep them out of people's yards might be something that will be beneficial. I made some calls and I found a couple places that we can buy. I'm recommending if we do that, we do concrete because it'll last forever. We can get a tank delivered here for about $600 or $700. We will have to use Public Works to install a water line. We don't have to, but without a water line going to it, it's going to become, you have to have somebody go out and fill it all the time, and it's going to get stagnant. I'm not recommending any kind of aeration pumps or any other kind of pump into it or electricity at all. I didn't, I mean, that's something that could be done, but I didn't take that in consideration. We could use a livestock float valve, which will basically keep it filled to a certain level within the tank, and then it can be allowed at sometimes periodically to run excessively to overflow it. I did speak with Brandon, and we do have access to water. It's not as easy to get to as we originally had hoped. We would have to probably plug into an irrigation line, one of the sprinkler systems. Well 6 doesn't seem to be viable because there's no pressure tank there. And I guess we could run it from there, but I mean, if we do it. There was one thing that was brought to my attention by Brandon, and that is, will a water feature like this fall under the pool enclosures codes? Having it required to be fenced. If it does, we're going to just have to reconsider something. But it's doable one way or another. We could just make it shallower. I asked Bill about that, and we haven't really talked about it. So I can't seem to find anything on our Muni code that really addresses that for a pond. So basically, funding comes up that Logan's very comfortable that we can get. It's a small project for them, very small project for them. They've got there's some other projects in here that were much larger, but they can get pretty much all of it done under a grant, provided we, help out a little bit. The chainsaw class is just an estimate of about $1,000 to $1,500. We don't know exactly what that is. And I don't even know if that's something we want to do. I just threw it in here. That's something that if this goes through, that can be discussed down the road, and y'all can either decide to do it or not. I just don't know. I just brought it up because it was mentioned by Logan. Like I said, the tank can be delivered for about $800. It's actually a little less than that, and one of them has already reached out to me, back out to me again, and said that they're willing to offer a discount to work with municipalities for beautification and improvements and things like that. So we might even be able to get it cheaper than that. That does include delivery. The $2,500 was a ballpark guess. I figured about $10 to $12 square, not square foot, but linear foot to run a pipe. Probably have to be galvanized. I don't think I would recommend trenching and burying it, so to speak. We may be able to run it along the surface and just kind of surface bury it. I don't know. It really depends on where it is, how far, and how involved it's going to get. And an automatic filling ball float valve is about $100 to $200. So all of that, including the chainsaw class, would be roughly $5,000. And then we constantly have a lot of problems with the city events about there's not enough power. I think we have to turn the lights on to use the power on some of the poles out there. So for $10,000, and this is a ballpark, we can use that to improve that power and maybe get some upgrades that we need out there so we don't have to kind of like run all those generators all over the place. Now, that leaves about $11,000 left that, unless somebody can come up with some use for it, I don't see a reason why we can't return that to the general fund. I mean, we've had this money in there for 5 years. The only thing I know of that's been used for it was the survey. I don't know if that's correct or not. Michelle may know. I think it's just the survey. I don't remember. I think there was $50,000 originally in there, and the survey was about 24, so that's pretty much all it is. So if we're not going to use it, we ought to do something with it and return it back. But I don't recommend doing that unless we move forward with, most of this project. This thing has been a pain in the rear ever since I've lived in this city. It's I mean, I know I'm going to take a public hit on it. That's fine. Let them come. The primary accomplishment, I feel, is it's going to, add a critical, adequate access in the rear of the track for the firefighters and their equipment to protect key city facilities and private residents along Bikeway and Elm Spring in the event of a fire, while retaining a natural and rustic look from all sides. Provides an additional feature to aid and improve the natural wildlife. This is the water pond, to the natural wildlife and habitat on the track to provide the needed water and free path for larger animals to move easier through the property. It will greatly enhance and improve the casual visual image of the property from a long days of Vala. Removes the generally undesignated excess funds from the municipal track and returns them into the general budget, assuming we do this. Gives the tract a set purpose as a natural habitat and allows for the possibility at some point in the future of very low impact nature trail settings to be considered, I'm going to clarify that, considered at some point in the future to allow all of our residents to use the property and enjoy it. Gives the track a set, albeit compromised purpose, and hopefully removes it from much of the divisive and unproductive conflict in our city. Now, I know we're going to get into the core survey. I don't buy the core survey. I think it was flawed. It's not representative. Yes, there was a majority of the people responding on the survey that didn't want to do anything, but not a very big majority. And it wasn't certainly a mandate. So that is my proposal. I think I've covered everything. It's just my idea. It's up to y'all.
Thanks, Mike. Anybody have any thoughts, any questions? Mike?
Chief Naughton, if we do the fuel break, would that allow access of your firefighting equipment into the municipal track? Because I understand you need 14 feet clearance to get your trucks down there.
You have a brush truck.
Brush truck.
Brush truck you need. It would depend on the final drawing from the Forest Service. There's a difference between a fire break and a shaded fuel break. A shaded fuel break has trees. You're not clearing a path. It has trees that are limbed up to eliminate ladder fuels that move fire. But for the most part, fire can't sustain itself in the canopy, so the canopy can touch. And the whole idea when you say shaded fuel break is to not separate the canopy, but gut everything 10 feet up so there's no fuel. A fire break actually creates a physical barrier through a road, something that you would be able to drive through. A shaded fuel break would not guarantee road access. Could you put in a shaded fuel break and take out a few trees right in the middle of the path and make something? Absolutely. But looking at the picture, I don't know exactly how it's going to go. I mean, it would have to have road access. You'd have to have a spot in off Baseball and a spot in off of jump the curb here at City Hall and go back or behind 911 or wherever.
Correct.
I don't think that.
But you know, that was just his suggestion to alleviate, I mean, a fire break was mentioned, and I said, well, that's basically clear cutting. And I said, we're going to have a significant number of people, including myself, that aren't going to particularly like that idea. But the fuel break, and he basically said exactly, and I didn't clarify it that much, that he said exactly what you said, that he wouldn't know until they get in there, probably with you and whoever, Public Works, the city manager, whoever, and walk through it and find a path that they could lay out with GPS coordinates to identify it, and then carefully look at, you know, that path and try and open it up down the center for your equipment. He did specifically mention that, so. That's just something you'll have to, that the staff and the Forestry Service are gonna have to kind of coordinate on.
I would say that on that piece of land, our biggest threat from fire is gonna come from Daysville.
I agree.
It's gonna be a road-initiated fire that starts at Daysville and burns into it. So the part that would be the biggest thing that would lessen our chance of fire on the property would be clearing, I think it's gonna be more than 10 feet, but limbing up and taking out some underbrush along Daysville, and then all the way through the back. Shaded fuel break would absolutely slow the spread of fire. Will it absolutely stop all fire? No.
No, well, I'm not suggesting that, but,
You have a big, if that whole property catches on fire and you've got 40-mile-an-hour wind, it's not gonna be.
no, I agree. And that was discussed on the shaded, the improved entry is what he calls it. Basically, it's a visual aspect, and it does along the roadbed, it, you know, from the cigarette butts and things like that getting tossed out. I said 10 feet, it could be 20 feet, could be 30 feet. I don't know what it could be. And his idea was to not do it in a straight line, but rather kind of wave it in and out so that it looks like it's more natural, and not just, you know, here's your fire break or your fuel break, and then you have your underbrush and everything going back. There again, there's no specific plans or layout of any of this in anything I propose, because it all depends on y'all working together to, you know, find the best thing, the best path.
Okay, Mike?
The Firewise area that we did is less than half of an acre, right? What was the result on our chipper when we did that? Could our chipper handle this, or are we gonna have to get a new chipper?
Oh, I don't think we'll have to buy a new chipper. I think that the estimates in here on what it's gonna take to do it are a little light. We had 2 guys cut for 4 hours, and we had 8 people chipping, and we couldn't keep up. We do have access to USAA, which has mandatory volunteer time, or voluntold, or whatever you call it, that are big Firewise supporters that come out and do it. But that project over there, it is, on the grand scheme of things, it's a small project. But it's fairly, I mean, it'll take, Logan talked about 10 guys in there cutting. And it'll take at least 2 weeks to cut it all, drag it, chip it. I mean, I think we have the chippers to do it. I mean, we have a big chipper, and it has new blades, and it runs really well right now. And then we have a small chipper, it just won't chip a lot of the stuff, the big cedar and stuff that they're gonna feed it. It'll chip underbrush. The Forest Service doesn't have a chipper.
Yeah, Michelle?
But we could also budget to rent one or hire a company to come with a shredder if we needed it.
Ours will, as long as it's running good, it'll eat it up, and I know they invested a significant portion of money into it last year. Blades, hydraulics,
is the path that you did for the well, clear enough for you to drive a fire truck through to the back?
I've never driven the brush truck in there. I've driven my toddler through there, and I know Brandon's driven the one-ton trucks. I mean, our truck is probably a little bit wider and a little bit taller,
But
but
not much.
I think there's,
it'll go through.
So that shows the canopy kinda, or did you just clear cut to do that?
No, we did clear cut, but the canopy itself is at 14 feet. We did that
Okay.
because we took what would a rig, to get a rig back there for pulling the well.
Oh,
That's
okay.
what we basically used as our guide for turns and stuff, keeping our oak trees back there.
I walked it the other day, and there's one spot where, kind of about in the middle, where it kind of like goes to that, and it makes that little, kind of little dog leg, you know, but you come through essentially a little bit of a natural open clearing spot into another one, and there's this one spot where there's two fairly good-sized trees there, and they overlap each other. That might be something that would have to be pushed back up, but other than that, I know you can get a pretty good-sized truck in there now on that. And
And
Bill?
that's the place where you had a couple oak trees, so the path that he took didn't take any oak trees out, it took just the cedars out. And then there was that one tricky spot where they did remove a couple limbs, I believe, but did not remove the trees just to allow access.
Okay.
it's possible, I was thinking about this, it's possible that they could incorporate most of that access path as the fuel break, but you would have to turn it in the back at well 6 back towards the, essentially the existing firework that was done in there and move it that way. I don't know, like I said, it would have to be up to, I guess, y'all and the Forestry Service getting in there and just looking at the best option. It may be more complicated than I have envisioned. It's possible. I always probably underestimated it, but that is possible that it could just use that current path in there.
Mike, is it something that you could work with, Chief, is there something that you could work with Mike to come up with what you think would be a realistic budget to accomplish the goals that he stated?
Absolutely. I don't think there's anything wrong with the budget now, since we're not budgeting in city staff time. But I think it will take, more than 1 or 2 people on that project. I would say if they get the grant, even if you get the Sawyers back there to cut everything, you're gonna want a city person back there making sure that we're not, hold on, we just hit a 4-foot around oak tree. We don't wanna cut it down, we wanna limb it up. I mean, you give a guy a chainsaw, and he's gonna cut a path, and he's gonna cut a path, and I just think it's gonna be a little bit more city resources. If they can get USAA out there, it's still gonna take more than 1 or 2 city people, plus it's gonna take city equipment, and they will chip as they go, they won't spread the mulch or anything, they just drag the chipper behind the truck and shit.
Yeah.
So,
He indicated to me that they do have a chipper and would bring a chipper. Now, I don't know any of the details other than what I'm getting from Logan Herschel. But he said they would bring one, that they could literally do all of it with no help at all, but it's much more complicated.
Okay. Mary Ann?
You guys gonna be surprised by what I have to say?
Oh, boy.
No, I live at Elm Spring and along Bikeway, and so I question Mr. Colmier. Did you talk to any of the neighbors over there about this idea?
No.
Okay. And I will say flat out, I respect the fact that you come and say, this is an idea, I'm proposing it, and standing behind it. Because that's the problem, is we can't talk about any of this. You talk about it being a pain in the rear. The Muni tract is not a pain in the rear. It's the fact that we cannot talk about it, okay? And we can't have differences of opinion without anybody pointing the finger and saying, you're the enemy because you disagree with me.
Yeah.
You know? So I respect the fact that you did that. But I do have questions, you know. One of them is, did you talk to anybody? Because we're over there on Elm Spring and Bikeway. That said, we are not the arbiters of what happens on the Muni Tract, because as you point out, it is something of interest to the entire community. I am concerned about the intent behind this, because I know Chief Naughton did come to the tree committee and talk about Firewise, and at no time was this issue about safety raised. So I have a bit of a concern because of lack of trust about the whole issue. Not about you, but just in general, about us being able to talk about this issue. Because, you know, I've lived in Cheveneau Park at Elm Spring, right there by the Muni Tract, since 2004. And no one has ever raised the issue of a fire or the possibility of needing to clean it up. The first time I started getting involved in the city, I was able to ride along with someone as part of the P&Z committee who talked about, we drove down De Zavala, and their interpretation of what Muni Tract looked like was completely different than mine. I think it's beautiful as it is. I think it's perfect as it is. We've heard just in this meeting tonight what makes Cheveneau Park unique. This is absolutely one of those things that makes Cheveneau Park unique. And if we start touching it, if we start messing with it, it changes the characteristic of Cheveneau Park. And I'm not the final arbiter. We all are up here. And so I'm glad we're talking about it. At the same time, we have been told, whether we agree with the survey or not, what a majority of respondents would like us to do, and that is leave it alone. Now, we can argue about that and talk about it and decide, do we need to do some kind of other survey or not? But what I find most galling about the discussion is that it took an arm and a leg and pulling teeth to spend $5,000 to get this facility outfitted so that we could have mics, video, so that residents could participate when they can't attend meetings. And yet we want to spend $10,000, however much more money than we've already budgeted, so we can have better parties. I am a big proponent of parties. I'm not a big proponent of the tax dollars paying for parties, but that's just me. So I just want us to be able to continue to have a discussion and it not be a personal, I hate anybody who brings up the idea of doing something on Muni Tract, because I don't. I'm just very passionate in terms of my view, and I hope we can continue to talk about it. But let's, you know, this idea of we've got to do something because there's a fear of a fire issue. I mean, I can applaud the thinking outside the box, and that's a different tack that we haven't seen yet. But, you know, when Chief Naughton talked at the tree committee about Firewise, that wasn't an issue. And I just, you know, what looks good to you, I may disagree with, and hopefully we can come to some kind of compromise.
I agree. There's been years that this has been before this council, this issue. No one's done anything about it. No one's suggested doing anything about it. No one has, yeah, you wanted to make it into a natural habitat.
No, I didn't. I
Or
said,
a wildlife preserve. No,
No, I didn't.
hang on. I remember you saying you would like to investigate doing that, and it never went anywhere.
that's
But
not
there
true.
is no effort to look at it as an asset to the city that all people can use. I've been on council for 2.5, 3 months. and I'm going to do what I think needs to be done for the city. This isn't for me. I don't really want to do anything to it other than leave it natural. But I do think it's ugly. I think it's a fire hazard, and I will stand on that. And I will take it to the people if I have to. But I think we need to do something about it. I think we have a responsibility as the leaders of this city to think ahead on that. We're always thinking, be proactive. If we get a fire in there, it's not going to make any difference to anybody, you know, if somebody's house on Elm Springs or Bikeway burns down. They're going to say, why didn't y'all do something to alleviate this? You know, when we hear the chief say, well, we couldn't get our equipment back there. I'm just saying that this is a good idea to consider. It's not my decision. I'm one vote. I will stand by whatever y'all decide. It's up to you four people to decide. I will vote for this. Now, if we put anything else like a pond on it, or we do the chainsaw class, I can go either way. But I think the fire break, the fire fuel break, is something we need to do.
I'd just like to say that the only thing I ever proposed was listening to what residents that spoke to us via the survey said, which was to leave it alone. I proposed putting a plaque out there that said, this is Legacy Chavano Park. Protect it as Heritage Chavano Park, Legacy Chavano Park, whatever you want to call it. Down the road, and I was told by this mayor that I needed to go and research what needed to be done, what could and couldn't be done, when we all know what can and can't be done. We as a council decide. We as a council decide. I never said a natural habitat, an animal wildlife park or anything like that. I said, put up a plaque that says this is Heritage Chavano Park. It's Legacy Chavano Park. It's as it was when Chavano Park came into being, and it's as it is as long as this entity lets it be as it is.
Personally, I think it's a failing ecosystem. The invasive junipers are taking over and choking out the legacy trees. I'm not ever going to advocate that we clear cut it. I just think it can be cleaned up and it can be made a little more attractive and a little more presentable, and then we can call it a legacy. We can call it whatever we want. I just think this is something that we should consider, you know. And if we don't, we don't. But I'm just, you know, I researched it, maybe not very well. I presented my argument, and now it's up to 4 other people, not me. I'm going to vote for it. Y'all are going to decide. And I don't know what else to say on it.
Michelle?
Well, and I will say that in 8+ years, I've had many people talk. The chairman of P&Z talks about it ad nauseum, about clearing Days of Allah and making it look better and making it not look like a ratty, scruffy mess. So there have been quite a few people, and most of the people who've made the comments happen to live in Chavano Creek and Bentley Manor. So they don't want to see it looking like it looks now. I think it's a good idea, and I support it.
Okay, anybody else have a comment? Bob?
Well, Mike, I think you did a good job researching. There may be a few holes, but, you know, I appreciate the effort you put in. I think it goes back to, well, there's 2 things I'll say. One is the municipal tract, the semantics of the municipal tract get pushed to the finite amount of land we have that's undeveloped behind there, when in fact the municipal tract is the entire property. And I want to make sure that, I've said it a number of times at council, I want to make sure I say it tonight. The municipal tract includes these buildings, it includes the front part of the land, it improves the firewise, it improves this back area, and it improves the acreage that tends to be what everybody focuses on. And the entire municipal tract is what we need to focus on, not just that undeveloped piece of land. I think it's like the generators. You know, to me, in an emergency situation, I mean, do we, you know, as you said, Mike, earlier, we may not need them today, but we need them. And there could be a situation in which we need those emergency generators. I think it's the same thing with the clearing some of the brush that could be a problem with fires. I mean, we can sit here and, you know, if it's something that we deem to be a hazard, then I think it's worth looking at. If we sit on it and don't do anything, shame on us. But I want to go back to what Mike said, and that is that, and I'm going to speak for myself, not everybody else, but I love the natural habitat of the back part of the municipal tract. And I will always support it being a natural habitat. However, if it makes sense to cut the brush back on days of all for safety reasons and to make it look a little bit better and create this fuel break that we talked about, I don't think that fuel break is going to impact the look of the back part of the municipal tract, the undeveloped part. And if it does help the ecosystem and the animals, I don't think you're going to get a lot of complaints about that. So I think it's worth pursuing. I think it's a good discussion that we've had, and I think there's a lot of good opinions out there.
Okay. Mike, do you have any comments?
I go back to the fact that folks throw rocks at the core survey, but that's the only only data that we have, and they've basically told us to leave it alone. I supported the road to the well because that's something we needed to do. If we vote to do this fuel break, then I would strongly want to make it along the road that we've already gotten. I don't think that a stock tank back there is a good idea because someone's going to have to take care of it. Even if it's completely donated, once it's there, city employees have to take care of it, and it's going to fill with leaves. It's going to become a mosquito factory. It's got there's legacy costs there. I like the idea of the electrical outlets. That sounds great to me, but I just don't feel that the people of Chavano Park want us to go in there and monkey with the back part of the municipal tract.
Okay. Mary Ann?
I would just say that if it's, if this is something that a majority wants to do, then I would ask that the majority stand up and allow residents to know that this is going to happen, whether that means we have a public hearing about it or something. If it's something that you all feel strongly about, it's not something that should be any surprise to residents. And, you know, we've done surveys, we've had town halls, we've had so many things that this is just one more thing that if this issue is a pain in the rear, as you say, then I think that we do owe it to residents to let them know what the majority of this council wants to do with the Muni tract that we haven't done before.
Okay, you know, where that leaves us is, number one, do we ask Mike and Chief to sit down and to go back through the numbers and to come back with firmer numbers, not on the electricity, because Chief, obviously, that's not your expertise, but on the fire-wise aspect of the project is. Bob, do we do that? Okay, Mike?
Yes, sir, please.
Okay, Mary Ann?
What is the question you're
The
saying?
question is, do we come back with more numbers?
My vote is no.
Okay, Michelle?
Yes.
Mike?
I'm willing to do that. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to come back with more numbers for our next budget meeting on the, what the fire-wise cost would be. Now, let's talk about the electricity. Is there a consensus for the electricity on council? Bob? Mike? Mary Ann?
No.
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
Mike, okay, so Bill, if you could get with Billy Rhodes or somebody comparable and get some information on that.
Have that, I'll provide at the next meeting.
Okay, and until, the final aspect of Mike's proposal was to release back money. Until we actually know what the money is, it's hard to release anything back. Mike, are you okay with waiting on that? Until we know what the money is?
Oh, I prefer we do it right now, but given my
Okay, so we'll consider that when we come back together and make a decision on the budgetary process on returning money. Okay, did that take care of items, all but item 13? Okay, does anybody have something that they would like to bring to the budget process at this time? Michelle?
Was the chainsaw class something we wanted to pursue?
That's part of the budgetary process.
Okay.
I just wanted to bring up something for water. I'm sure everybody read that Al Whaley wrote a memo in the Roadrunner about how he was, in the water committee, was going to go out and do some sort of survey on water rates. I'd like to propose, if we're actually going to do that, that we put money in the budget and do a professional survey, and it's not a survey of what residents want. It's a study of what we need to do in our water system. I have always said that the rates should be based on a base, everybody should pay the same base rate that covers the cost of the system, and then the water rates vary by tier. We don't do that. We subsidize the water use on the cost of operating the system. I just think that if we're going to study it, we should have some really good numbers based on what our projections for income are, what our expenses are going to be, and come up with a viable plan if we're going to do some sort of rate changes. And so I don't know how much that would cost and who would do that, but there's probably somebody that could do that in a professional manner.
Okay. Does anybody have any comments on that before Mike?
This did come up in the WAC. Laura said that she estimates said at that time that she estimated a rate study would cost between $25,000 and $50,000, $25,000 to $30,000. It depends on that. You know, she can speak to that, and there is no money in the budget for it. So.
Well, but my concern is that if the WAC is going out and coming up with their own little ways of determining what the value of the system is and how we should be charging the residents, I don't think that that's professional.
Mike?
That's really not what Al was proposing, if I remember right. I think Bill was there. It was just that they were going to study and try and come up with base numbers on what the water board needs in terms of operational revenue, and then try and come up with, something to present from there. It may need a rate study, but I don't think Al is looking at doing specifically a rate study. That was my interpretation of it.
Well, the way he wrote the letter, the way he wrote the article, a number of people contacted me about it and thought we were going to be raising our rates.
Okay, anybody else have any comments on that?
So just
Well-
on the radar.
Well, if you want further consideration and guidance on that, let me know. I will tell you that my interpretation of that was that he thought that they could do some pretty good analysis initially, and that might lead into some recommendations for a rate increase. Whether or not that would be the rate study, I think, was something that he was going to then do the initial analysis of what the expected revenues are, what the realistic expenses are, and I think he was going to then make his conclusion, his recommendation based by that. I don't know. I mean, I think it may have been that he said, okay, this could be so conclusive that we would come to council and we would recommend increases, or it might be that now that we have this, we need to do a professional study. But a lot of this information is going to have to be presented anyway. Kind of the expenditures and costs with the water system, it's going to come from the Public Works, Water Department. Probably be facilitated more professionally with a professional. But so again, it was kind of they were kind of filling it out. Okay, should we do this? We can do a study. Will that lead to a conclusion where we're going to make a recommendation? Maybe, maybe not. And that part of those recommendations might be to do a water study. But we did have a discussion of if you're going to raise what rates, and if it comes from a committee, how's that going to come across versus if you did a professional study and it came from someone that does this for a business? You know, if you have top cover, if it's an exterior professional that does it versus if, you know, 5 citizens got together with the staff and concluded this and we presented it, you know, it would depend. It would depend on how well you're able to present that and how credible your information was, and there'll be questions about it. So, again, that was all part of the discussion.
There just needs to be a lot of communication on this subject. It's like the tax rate. I mean, water rates are something people pay a lot of attention to, and you can't just willy-nilly say, oh, I think I'm going to do a rate thing, and then have people just, you know, flying off the handle not knowing what we're doing.
And as somebody who's lived in Chavano Park for 30 years, I remember the time that we almost burned down City Hall because of the arbitrary changes in our rates. So that it is something for all of us to keep in mind.
That's why we went to limestone.
Good idea. Okay, does anybody have any additional items in item 13 that they would like to bring before the city council? Does staff have any additional items in item 13 that they'd like to bring before the council?
There's my mascot that just went around there, a gecko lizard. Okay, so from what I gather, we will schedule a workshop after the conclusion of the city council meeting to close the, you know, to discuss these last remaining items and cost in the municipal tract.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
There's going to be a workshop after Monday's meeting?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Does anybody have anything else?
And then the next step would be, we will then take this city manager budget, prepare the final the final budget for a first reading in the second week of September. And without, for right now, not a lot of anticipated changes. We've got most of the guidance. We've got a couple loose ends on this municipal tract to do, and we'll go from there. So.
Okay. If there's, Mary Ann?
Question, why can't we have the workshop before the meeting?
We can do it however council wants to do it. If consensus is to do it before, we can do it before, we can do it after. I mean, just, the idea was, one of the ideas was we include it as an agenda item, but then of the council meeting, which we're meeting anyway. So,
Well,
before or after,
I would rather go after, because I'm leaving town on Tuesday and I need more time in the office instead of less time in the office.
I'm not proposing to change the date start time. I'm not proposing to change the start time. Just have the workshop first.
we can have the workshop at 6:30 and then the council meeting immediately after.
I'd rather do it after.
But why? My issue is, if we're talking about Muni Tract, it's like Alderman Ross just said about the water. These are issues that are important, that people want to be communicated the information. This is one of them. If people come to the meeting on Monday, they'll have an opportunity to hear what we're discussing about the Muni Tract in particular.
Okay, the reason I would say is because we have an ordinance that says what time our regular meetings start and end. And we did not do that in advance of the meeting, and we can't do it now because this is a workshop. We can't make a decision.
The city manager gets to, and he has 72 hours to put out the notice. So all he has to do is put the time of when the meeting starts. We've done that before. This is not anything new.
But we're not having a special meeting. He can move to create new meetings within 72 hours for special meetings.
Does anybody else?
That was what I
vote
thought the
care
rules were, but
one way or the other?
Well, I just think it's complicated. I'll do it early, but if your concern is residents being involved in it afterwards, they're gonna come to the meeting, and if they're concerned about anything on the municipal tract or the
At-
workshop, they can.
At what time? That's my issue, is that it's already 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
The meeting's over. Lots of residents don't like to do that.
And then they can watch it on the video.
Maybe we can't get there early either, so,
yeah.
By early being 6:30?
no, 5. I mean,
Yeah.
What time does the meeting start? 6:30? So we start the meeting at 6:30 with a workshop, have the meeting thereafter. If transparency to the people on an issue of importance to them, is important to this council, I don't understand why we wouldn't host that workshop before the meeting so that people can have notice and attend and not have to come up here at 9 or 10 at night, given whatever time we end our meeting, our regular meeting on Monday. That's just me. I'm not trying to chastise anybody. I'm just trying to say, come on, if this is really an issue of importance, why don't we give residents every opportunity?
And that's fine, but I'm gonna miss it because I have to be in Austin on Monday and I won't be back until 6:30.
I'm saying start the workshop at 6:30.
But it's a regularly scheduled meeting that has to be held at 6:30.
It
Our
starts
regular-
whenever the notice is given that it starts.
No, it's in the ordinance.
It's in the ordinance. Our regular meetings start at 6:30.
They always do.
Sorry, you were trying to tell me.
Okay. Is there anything else? Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Bob and Michelle, all in favor say aye. All opposed, same sign. The motion carries.